Varnashrama institution of the scriptures for the propagation of atheism. After the arrival of the Europeans, through the agencies of the newly established secular universities and an organized industrial and commercial system, the people have been further inoculated with the secular outlook of materialistic civilization of a most thoroughgoing type. This new outlook is unhesitatingly distrustful of existing social and religious systems of the country and is desirous of real reform, but is far too materialistic in itself not to hesitate to welcome the teaching of Sri Caitanya, which is based on the scriptures and which favors the rejuvenation of the theistic Varnashrama organization of society. This digression, if such it may perchance appear to be to the patient reader, from the regular track of our narrative, is necessary in order to prevent misconceptions regarding the activities of the infant Caitanya which are quoted by his pseudo-followers of the present day in justification of their adoption of the current atheistical practices of the Smarta caste organization. The associates of Sri Caitanya, however, arrived at a very different conclusion that has been stated above from the acts of the Lord himself as the supreme teacher by his own conduct. Nimai retained his habit of indulging in frequent fits of crying and would not be consoled by any of the methods that are usually effective in the case of ordinary children. He did not cry for having anything of this world. He used to cry in order to make those around him chant constantly the name of Hari. Nimai would laugh and dance in the mother's lap at the sound of the curtain of Hari with such extraordinary grace of expression and movement of his limbs that those who chanted the name of Hari to please him did so for their own pleasure. Those who are obstinately incredulous about the authenticity of the facts of religious history need not reject these on the plea of want of contemporary evidence. They were faithfully put into writing by the eternal companions of Sri Caitanya, and none of the numerous enemies and opponents of Sri Caitanya of that or subsequent age ever thought of contradicting them on the ground that they were the concoctions of the imagination, which should be impossible in the case of a series of great writers unless they deliberately conspired for stating and accepting as facts the products of their mesmerized imaginations. Neither can we altogether admire the judgment of those secular historians who may be disposed to regard them as trivial, and the explanations of them offered by the associates and followers of Sri Caitanya as labored after thoughts. To the candid reader, the least of these so-called trifles and labored after thoughts may perchance possess more value for the real well and woe of mankind in a proportion that is inversely proportional to the cumulative blighting influence of all the empirical accounts that have ever been written of the authentic deeds of the mighty heroes of this world. Godhead, when he chooses to sport as infant, is more fully divine than when he plays the open role of the supreme ruler by his omnipotence of all these countless worlds. His activities in either case are, however, alike incomprehensible to the perverted understanding of the conditioned soul who is averse to his service. No tittle of such activities has also the least chance of suffering any exaggeration by any amount of our poor and misdirected human praise that may be wrongly lavished upon it. The praise of them that is practiced by the devotees is the only method of enabling us to realize their most wonderful and exclusive fitness for all true praise. This is the curtain of Krsna, and it was this truth whom infant Nimai constantly tried to impress on his attendants through their realized experience of him, by making them sing constantly the curtain of Hari without offense, i.e., in order to please the Lord himself. This is the central subject of the teaching of Sri Gaurasundar, and its importance and early manifestation have accordingly been noted with reverent admiration by those who had been enabled by the grace of Sri Caitanya to realize the highest truth, to whose service the jiva can aspire to attain by the loving service of the truth himself. Lord Visvambhar now exhibited the pastime of moving about on his knees in the yard of Sachi. He sped about on his knees with the most enchanting art, while the tiny bells on his waistband made a most delicious music. He roved over the yard most fearlessly and grasped at everything that he saw, whether it was the fire or the venomous serpent. One day while thus roaming the yard, Nimai actually caught hold of a huge serpent that had found its way into the house. At the touch of the child's hand, the brute immediately coiled up. Viswambhar then quietly laid himself down on the soft cushion of its coils. The sight of this sent a thrill of horror into the hearts of all who beheld it. In their utter dismay and helplessness they called upon Gruda to save the child. The parents with many others set up a wail of great agony. Nimai laughed as he lay couched on the coils of the monster. The lamentations of the onlookers at last induced the serpent to move off of its own accord. The son of Sri Sachi pursued the retreating brute with the intent of catching it again. They dashed at the child and brought him away and pressed him tightly to their bosoms. All the ladies blessed the child, saying, "May thou live forever." Some tied protective amulets, some recited texts of benediction, while some fetched the feet wash of Vishnu and sprinkled his body therewith. Some said that the boy was born a second time. Some said that the serpent happened to be of the particular species that did no harm, which was the reason why his life was saved. Gorsundar only went on laughing and frequently essayed to make after the track of the serpent and was as often anxiously brought back by all the people. The relation of all fearful objects to the Lord is the exact opposite of their relation to the Jiva. Godhead is the source of all fear. He is fear himself. Mahakala, the destroyer of all things, is afraid of him. Those who love the Lord are not, therefore, afraid of anything. Those who do not trust the Lord and think that the various dreadful objects are not afraid of him, are necessarily afraid of them. All such fear is condemnable for the reason that it has no reference to Godhead and is, therefore, due to the anxiety for one's worldly safety. This looking away from Godhead to one's false self is the cause of all fear and is the reason why such fear is also sordid. The fear of Sachi and Jagannath and of the assembled people for the safety of Nimai does not belong to the category of such sordid fear and is, therefore, an event that deserves to be recorded and was also exhibited by them, by the beneficent contrivance of the spiritual power of the Lord, to teach the proper use of the instinct of fear to all ungodly conditioned souls. Besides providing the opportunity of service to those devotees who did not know, by the force of the beneficent spiritual power, that he was Godhead himself, Sri Gorsundar also contrived to receive by this method the perfect homage of the most highly beloved of his fully conscious transcendental servitors whom he wanted to specially favor. Fire and the serpent that were the causes of the consternation of friends and relatives were respectively the god who identifies himself with the element of fire and Sri Anantadeva who is the plenary form of Sri Samkarsana and who serves as the couch of the Supreme Lord. Sri Gorsundar chose to receive their service for the purpose of his pastime on this occasion. The pervert yogi only deludes the people by his display of seeming immunity from mundane fire and serpent and juggling imitation of these acts of the Lord. Their exhibitions tempt other atheistical people like themselves to follow the method of the Astanga Yoga for the profane attainment of powers of apparent mastery over nature. There are also people who are disposed to class Sri Caitanya and his devotees with these pseudo-yogis and explain also their performances by the possession of improper yogic powers. But as a matter of fact the display of the pseudo-yogic power is no part of the function of the pure soul taught and practiced by Sri Caitanya and his associates. The power which the pervert yogi imagines as belonging to himself being acquired by his own meritorious endeavors is a penal delusion which is as condemnable as the attempt of acquiring any other form of worldly power. It happens to possess the appearance of a superhuman entity in degree and measure, but is, as a matter of fact, only a still more objectionable form of selfish material enjoyment and only a potent means of self-deception or godlessness. For this reason, those who try to understand the doings of Sri Gorsundar and his devotees from the point of view of the Astanga Yoga obtain, as the due punishment of their selfish labors, a further increase of aversion to Godhead. Chapter V. Boyhood. And now the son of Sri Sachi Devi began to toddle on his tender legs. These pedestrian performances with uncertain steps were confined to the yard of Sri Sachi. The child constantly moved about in the yard. Every limb of the boy was most exquisitely beautiful. His face was the envy of the moon. His head was beautifully rounded. A profusion of fine curls gracefully clustered round the forehead. His eyes were remarkably wide, resembling the petals of the lotus flower. These reminded one of the appearance of boy Krsna. His long hands hang down to the knees. The lips were crimson. His bosom was wide and possessed of every auspicious feature. The whole form of Gora had a most pleasing yellowish tint that matched him to perfection. His fingers, hands and feet were particularly beautiful. While the Lord tripped about in the haphazard fashion of children, the mother used to get alarmed, as it seemed to her that blood came out of the delicate feet of the boy as they pressed lightly on the ground. The parents were unspeakably happy. They felt and whispered to each other that a great personage was born in the family, which ensured deliverance of themselves and the family from the bondage of this world. These high hopes of the parents were confirmed by the peculiarity that the child fell to crying if he did not hear the sound of the name of Hari. He was the very embodiment of joy whenever the name of Hari was chanted to him by clap of hand, and would express his gladness by unceasing laughter and dancing as long as the name of Hari continued to be sung. This circumstance drew all the ladies of the neighborhood into the house from early dawn, who formed themselves into a merry ring round Gorsundar and performed the Samkirtan with clap of hand. The attentive boy danced, rolled on the ground grey with dust, and, climbing into the lap of mother, burst into merry peals of laughter. He danced with such charming poses of the limbs that it filled all the onlookers with inexpressible delight. The Lord in this artless manner of childhood made all of them perform the curtain of Hari. But they did not understand it. As the boy grew up he began to manifest great restlessness of disposition and constantly sped in and out of the house. He would frequently leave the house unattended and would beg from the passers-by fried rice, plantain, sweetmeats, and, in fact, whatever eatables they happened to be carrying. The extraordinary beauty of the boy softened everybody towards him, and perfect strangers gave him, as soon as they saw him, whatever he asked. No sooner did he obtain any gift than he ran into the house with the greatest joy and gave it to those ladies who chanted the name of Hari. Such precocity of the child made all persons laugh with great delight, and they would continue to chant the name of Hari with clap of hand. The Lord often left the house in this manner at all hours of the day and even in the evenings. That the holy name of Godhead should be sung constantly, to the exclusion of every other activity, is a proposition that is repeatedly enjoined by the scriptures, although it may appear at first sight to be impracticable. The mercenary preacher accepts a pecuniary remuneration for his exertions in delivering the word of God on the ground that he must have something to live upon. How can the name of Godhead be taken night and day without exposing oneself to sure starvation? The physical needs of the body compel every mortal to devote a part of his time to activities of this world. It may be urged with apparent reasonableness that the worldly activity for earning a livelihood is imperative and cannot be neglected by anybody in this world, whether he is a prince or a peasant, an atheist or a preacher of the word of God. Therefore, the declaration of the scriptures that the chanting of the name of Godhead at 11 times is the only function of every soul requires to be liberally interpreted in its application to the people of this world. The impracticability is perfectly clear and simple and can be understood even by a child. It is not possible that this obvious difficulty should have been overlooked and overruled by the numerous scriptural declarations, unless for a very good reason. That reason is also quite plain and may be briefly stated as follows. Godhead himself has the power and the will to provide for the maintenance of those who devote themselves wholeheartedly, night and day, to the performance of the curtain of himself. Wherefore, it is expressly forbidden in the scriptures to sell the word of God in exchange for anything. If a person, who sets up as a preacher of the word of God, makes of it a trade for the maintenance of himself and his family, for lacking the necessary faith in the promise of Godhead that he need not think for his own maintenance, he thereby commits an act of disobedience against Godhead and by reason of such sinfulness becomes unfit to receive or still less convey to others the holy word of the Lord. Sri Caitanya taught that the name of Godhead should be taken at all time with patience and humility. The patience consists in practicing perfect reliance on the word of God. The humility consists in giving up all thought of selfish enjoyment and accepting the desire to please and obey Godhead as the only object of one's serving activity. These considerations supply the real explanation of the otherwise mysterious behavior of the divine child. Godhead himself procures the necessaries for the maintenance of everyone who devotes himself to the chanting of the name of God, declare the scriptures. The level of conduct of all preachers should come up to this cardinal fact of spiritual practice if they expect to make their hearers believe, or make themselves believe, in the truth of the scriptures. Dancing and singing are forbidden to the Brahmanas, i.e., to those who know Godhead, except to serve the pleasure of Godhead and his devotees. The Brahmanas alone, who abstain from singing and dancing for any worldly purpose, are not only fit, but it is their duty to dance and sing the curtain of Hari for pleasing Godhead and his devotees. Nimai now set himself to carrying out in a systematic manner a series of reckless depredations in the households of the friends of the family who resided in the neighborhood. He took to thieving, and it was his daily pastime to steal something or other. He would stealthily drink the milk of one household, eat the cooked rice of another without notice, or, if he could obtain nothing to eat, he would break the earthen cooking pots of a third home. He would poke the babies put to sleep and make them cry, beating a hasty retreat the moment he was detected. If anybody chanced to catch him at his tricks, he would fall at his feet and express repentance. Let me go this time. I won't come again. I give my word to you that I won't steal again. Everyone was astonished at such precocity of the little child. No one was ever angered by these freaks. On the contrary, they all loved him. Nay, they loved him far more tenderly than they loved their own children. He stole away every faculty of the heart at the very first sight. The divine child took his pleasure in such extreme naughtinesses. The favor of God bears no resemblance to the favor that is expected from or conferred by worldly persons. We desire, by everything we do, only the gratification of our own senses in a gross or subtle form. When, therefore, we want to favor anybody, we naturally suppose that the only means of doing this is by providing him with the means of his sensuous gratification. All the ills that flesh is heir to are traceable to this inveterate self-indulging principle of our conditioned nature. The elaborate social machinery, with its so-called ethical codes, has been devised for the express purpose of augmenting each man's average share of worldly enjoyment. But we are all of us more or less conscious of the wild goose chase character of the pursuit of all worldly enjoyments. The causes of disappointment are many. Our hopes are never fully realized. The bliss that we promise ourselves invariably palls on its seeming attainment. We are perpetually oppressed with the sense of some besetting evil that poisons everything we desire to taste in the very act of tasting. We may be temporarily dazzled by worldly performances, but the inevitable dross is sure to discover itself in the long run in the most promising deeds of our lives. There is always this skeleton in the cupboard. The tragedies and comedies of worldly life alike repel us in the end by their grossness and triviality. Those who consider it heroic to put a good face on the inevitable thereby only display their disinclination to honestly tackle the issue that confronts them. All the same, the attitude of patience for the inevitable, which appeals so strongly to the so-called practical temperament, is tantamount to an avoidance to think on the solution of a besetting problem under the tacit plea that one's duty is done by simply shutting one's eye to the inexplicable side of one's conduct. But it is only a display of thoughtless egotism that imagines the presence of adverse circumstances and their abundance in this world for which the person himself is not in any way responsible. This attitude is both dishonest and shallow. It means only that one should consider it his duty to move heaven and earth for securing his own enjoyment and, after having secured a fair share of it when he finds that it does not answer his purpose, must still go on advocating the wisdom of such course and shut his eyes to the real worthlessness of such policy. This attitude is possible only when a person is too much enamored of the sensuous life despite its utterly disappointing quality. The faculties of the mind of such a person are viciously attracted towards hollow worldly advantages. He is so completely engrossed in his contemplation that he has neither time nor inclination to look to the other side. To such people the conduct of the boy Nimai would appear to be not at all different from that of ordinary naughty children who often turn into moral men and women on attaining the age of discretion and whose childish vices, therefore, are a mere result of the exuberance of their animal spirit and should not be put in the same category with the objectionable vices of grown-up people. Even this sort of moral condonation of childish vices seems unnecessary to a school of thinkers who are disposed to give every child a long rope in order to enable him to develop freely all sides of his nature. According to this school, a virile and aggressive personality in the worldly sense is better than a regulated and cramped one. The conduct of Gorsundar and his parents may, therefore, meet with the worldly approval of people of this stamp. But the attitude that the associates of Sri Gorsundar want us to realize in regard to these activities of the Lord is different from what are recommended by both the above views. The depredations that are committed against our worldly possessions by Godhead are of the nature of his special favor. This becomes self-evident as soon as they are understood as proceeding directly from the will of the Lord. In the cases we are considering just now, this latter condition was supplied automatically by the fact that the mischievous acts of the child were actually liked by those persons against whom they were committed by the Lord himself and were liked because of their connection with the Lord. If we love a frail mortal child, the imperfections of the object of our passion prevent the sentiment from acquiring the permanence that is its due and without which its full requirement is not satisfied. Hence the love of average worldly people for their children is unsure and shallow and cannot, by the very nature of its imperfection, extend to other children or even to all acts of one's own child. If one sets himself deliberately to love all little children without reservation, he will be rightly charged with trying to do something that is unnatural and fictitious. Such affection has no real basis to stand upon. We want to love our children from a natural impulse which is balked of its satisfaction by the unworthiness of the object to which it is directed. There was no cause of any such disappointment in the case of their love for Sri Gorsundar, as he is, indeed, Godhead himself. Hence, says the Bhagavatam, all the faculties really succeed in obtaining what they seek only when they are directed towards Godhead. This overwhelming attractiveness also supplies an indirect proof of the perfect personality of the Supreme Lord. An incident of these infant days is thus recorded by Krishnadas Kavira Goswami. One day Sachi brought a vessel full of fried rice and sweetmeats and gave it to Nimai, asking him to sit down and eat the same. Sachi then left him to attend to household work. The boy, however, began to eat raw earth by avoiding any notice. Sachi, however, perceived this and came running to the child with expostulations of disapproval, snatched the earth from the boy and asked him why he preferred it to the other eatables. The child burst into tears. "Why are you angry?" he said. "How am I to blame? It is you who gave me the earth to eat. Fried rice, sweetmeats, cooked rice, etc. are all transformations of earth. This, which I am eating, is earth. Those are also earth. Why do you consider them to be different? This body is of earth. Its food is also earth. Consider this well. I am helpless if you blame without reflection." Sachi was very much surprised in her heart at such reply. "Who taught you," she said, "to eat earth by the barren policy of intellectualists? The body is nourished only by eating cooked rice, which is a transformation of earth. If raw earth is eaten, disease is produced and the body is destroyed thereby. We fetch water in a pitcher, which is a transformation of earth. If we put water on a lump of clay, it soaks and dries up." The child said, "Why did you not tell me this before? I shall no more eat earth now that I know. When I feel hungry, I shall suck your breast." And, saying this, the boy smiled and climbed to the lap of mother and began to suck. These revelations of supreme power were constant and various. They were secured against recognition by the display of childishness that followed and served to blind everybody's judgment. Sri Sachi Devi did not evidently belong to the school of empiric abstractionists who deny Godhead the power of real manifestation and real creation, regarding the latter as temporary, unwholesome and elusive and, therefore, impossible of being in any way related to perfect Godhead. Sachi Devi, on the contrary, believed in the relationship of simultaneous unity and diversity of power with possessor of power and was not prepared to ignore qualitative differences that really exist between the fried rice and raw earth, after the manner of the Buddhists or believers in the undifferentiated abstract negation as Brahman. Child Nimai was more easily converted to the creed of his mother by her effective protest than falls to the lot of the average Mayavadan. One day, as the child was roaming in the town as usual by himself and with ornaments on all parts of his body, he attracted the attention of two thieves who thought on a plan of robbing his ornaments. Accordingly, one of them with sweet words took up the Lord into his arms, saying that they had been searching for him and would take him home. The Lord at once consented to their proposal and was carried on their shoulders a long distance through intricate lanes towards the place where the nefarious deed was to be perpetrated with safety and secrecy. Those thieves endeavored all this time to keep Nimai in humor by sweet words and the offer of prospective sweetmeats. While the Lord was being thus hurried off to their rendezvous, the members of his family missed him and began to search in all directions, but could find the boy nowhere. A great fear gradually took possession of their minds. Meanwhile, the thieves had been led by the deluding power of Vishnu into taking the road to the home of Jagannath Misra, under the impression that it led to their own place, and, on their arrival at Misra's house, felt quite sure that they had successfully reached their destination. They accordingly made the boy descend from their shoulders just where Jagannath Misra and the friends and relations of the family were sitting in silent grief, apprehending a great calamity. Nimai at once ran into the arms of his father and all present shouted Hari, Hari in the joy of a great relief, as if life himself was restored to their bodies. The thieves looked foolish and perplexed and were very much frightened when they found out that it was not their own place. Thereupon, availing of the confusion caused by the arrival of Nimai, they made good their escape. They did not stop till they felt that they were out of the reach of any possible pursuers. They were amazed by the nature of their adventure and thought that they had been under the spell of a black magician and had been saved only by the grace of goddess Chandi whom they worshipped. They hugged each other in a close embrace in their ecstasy of joy at their providential escape. As a matter of fact, it was also no ordinary good luck that had provided them an opportunity of carrying Nimai on their shoulders. Here, at the house of Jagannath Misra, after the first outburst of joy had subsided, they began to look about for the person who had brought Nimai home with the object of rewarding him by the present of a headdress. This was a piece of cloth which they wanted to tie round his head with their own hands. But although it transpired that two men had actually brought the child on their shoulders, no one came forward to claim the reward. Nimai was questioned and declared that he had gone to the bank of the Bhagirathi and had been brought on the shoulders of two strangers by paths that were unknown to him. The people arrived at the conclusion that it was an instance of what the scriptures declare, viz., that children, old men and those who have no body to look after them, are protected by the gods in the shape of luck. Thus thought they in their ignorance, unable to realize the significance of the occurrence by reason of the sportive intervention of the power of Vishnu. Those, concludes Thakur Brindabandhas, who listen to this story, which is one of the hidden narratives of the scriptures, attain to firm devotion to the feet of Sri Caitanya. Vishnu's power possesses at one and the same time a double face. One of these confers the knowledge of the divinity on one disposed to serve, the other obscures the spiritual vision and makes the jiva, who is averse to the service of Godhead, hanker for sensuous enjoyment. The jiva falls into the clutches of the latter, also called Maya, if he makes the attempt to understand the divinity by the resources of his own paltry intellect. In this instance the thieves were prevented by the spiritual energy to act in the wrong way, in spite of their bad intentions. The members of the family of Jagannath Misra were also prevented by the spiritual power, who supplies the conjunction of events forming the Leela of Godhead, from realizing the whole truth of the incident. The jiva possesses freedom of will but is lacking in the power of taking the effective initiative which belongs exclusively to Godhead. The jivas are made conscious of the purpose of Godhead in what they are enabled to do, just in the proportion that is necessary for the divine purpose. Those who rely on their own judgment for finding out the divine purpose, without desiring to receive the knowledge of it from himself, are guided by the deluding energy into wrong conclusions. But they are not themselves aware that their conclusions are wrong. This is, however, really opaque delusion. Those who submit to receive their enlightenment from Godhead are not thus deprived of the service of Godhead by the deluding power. In this instance it is not the deluding energy but the preventing spiritual power that relieved the thieves from their thievish propensity and sowed the seed for future service of the divinity. Herein the thieves were really most fortunate. It could not be otherwise, as Godhead himself is directly concerned. When thieves steal the property of worldly people, they are under the deluding power who punishes those who desire to serve themselves instead of God by helping them to gain their object in the shape of the attainment of their selfish enjoyment. But stealth, which is contrived by the spiritual power to be directed apparently against God himself for enhancing the charm of the divine Leela, produces the best results in spite of the apparently evil intention of the person who attempts to rob him, if the thief is not really anxious to go consciously against Godhead. In the case even of demon Ravana, who apparently succeeded in robbing Sita Devi, the illusion of his apparent success operated for his benefit by his death at the hands of Godhead himself. From these instances we should be careful, however, not to draw the wrong conclusion and suppose that Godhead is apt to reward those who cherish evil intentions towards himself for such offensive conduct. God rewards everybody impartially and fully, but the reward takes different forms according to the different antecedents of the recipients. In the case of the thieves, the stealth of God's property was prevented. But of this they were not conscious, and God was also served unconsciously by allowing himself to be carried on their shoulders to his own home. In the case of Ravana, he was deluded by the spiritual power into the belief that he was successful in stealing Sita. He, however, stole only the delusive form of Sita. This proved a means of correction for Ravana, although he had planned his offense against good advice. He was punished by the spiritual power by the slaughter of himself with all his kindred and followers. Ravana was well aware that he was going against Godhead. He was more fortunate than the two thieves, because he was enabled to realize that he was punished for his offense and also the utter wickedness of opposing the divine will. The power of Godhead is really one but acts consistently in opposite ways, accordingly as he is served or opposed. Her external face, which alone is open to the view of those who are opposed to Godhead, seems to be terrible and incalculable as long as they continue to be averse to God. Her benign face is seen only by those who are disposed to serve Godhead. The delusion of Jagannath Misra and his kindred and friends was absolutely wholesome, being of the nature of the benign operation of the spiritual power of Godhead in furtherance of the joy of his divine activities. One day Jagannath Misra called to his son and asked him to fetch his book from the inner apartment. As the boy entered the room running, Misra and Sachi distinctly heard exquisitely sweet sounds as of jingling of bells of anklets that were produced by the quick movements of the child. Presently Nimai came out with the required book and, making it over to his father, ran off for play. The parents were very much perplexed. There were no jingling anklets on the feet of their boy. Whence could the sound come? Their astonishment was changed to conviction as they went into the room. There they found, all over the room, prints of feet marked with the signs of the banner, the bold and the goad. They at once recognized the footprints of Vishnu, and both of them instinctively exclaimed that there would be no more birth for them, as they had a sight of those well-known wonderful divine feet never seen by them before. They reverentially bowed to the footprints of Godhead. Misra naturally enough concluded that it was the act of Damodar Sila, i.e., the Salagram Sila, who was the tutelary deity of the family and was regularly worshipped in the home. He thought that Gopala, cowboy Krsna, who dwelt in the Salagram Sila, walked about in the room, and the prints were of the feet of Gopala. Misra decided to undertake personally the worship of Damodar Sila from that day and asked Sachi Devi to cook rice boiled in sweet milk mixed with ghee as a special offering to Damodar Sila next morning. Misra with his own hands bathed the Salagram Sila with the 5 holy products of the cow and, in the company of his pious consort, reverentially worshipped the deity of the family. The Lord laughed in his mind at the conduct of his parents. Thereafter occurred a most wonderful event. A pilgrim Brahmana, who had done many pious deeds in his previous lives, was wont to wander all over the country in quest of Krishna. He worshipped the 6-letter mantram of Gopala, cowboy Krsna, and ate nothing except such food as had already been offered to Gopala. By good fortune it so chanced that he arrived at the Lord's house in course of his wanderings. The pilgrim Brahmana wore, as his cherished ornaments, the holy forms of Gopala and the Salagram Siwana suspended from his neck. The whole person of the pilgrim was aglow with the spiritual radiance of the ideal Brahmana, which can never be properly described in words. The mouth of the Brahmana constantly recited the name of Krishna. His eyes were listless by the influence of the sweet quality of Govinda that possessed his heart. At the sight of the newly arrived stranger guest, Jagannath Misra, struck by the visible force of his personality, rising from his seat with respect, made obeisance to him. Misra then welcomed his guest with all due formality. He himself washed the feet of his guest and offered him his best seat. After the pilgrim was refreshed and properly seated, the good Misra inquired the place of his residence. To this the Brahmana replied that he was a recluse and wandered about through sheer restlessness of mind. Misra, bowing low, observed that the wanderings of such as he testified to the good fortune of the world, which good fortune belonged to him that day, and, if commanded, he would make the necessary arrangements for his cooking of the meal for Krishna. The Brahmana, signifying his assent to the proposal of Misra, the latter with great pleasure proceeded to make all necessary preparations. He made ready the place of cooking by cleansing it with great care and brought thither all the articles required for cooking. The Brahmana, having cooked the meal with great satisfaction, sat down to make its offering to Krishna. No sooner did the Brahmana engage in the meditation of Krishna than Sri Gaur Sundar appeared before him. The body of the child was full of dust and perfectly nude. His beautiful eyes, hands, and feet were red. Smilingly he took up the food offered by the Brahmana with his beautiful hand and, in the view of the worthy Brahmana, ate a mouthful. The fortunate Vipra shrieked in an agony of grief. "That restless boy has stolen my cooked rice." His cry quickly brought Jagannath Misra to the spot, who found Sri Gaur Sundar in the very act of eating the cooked rice with a smiling countenance. Misra was greatly enraged and ran to administer his son a sound thrashing. The pilgrim Brahmana got up in great fear and caught hold of the hand of Misra. He said that the child had no knowledge of right and wrong. A wise man should never hurt such a one. He accordingly implored Misra to do no violence to the boy. Misra was very much dejected. The Brahmana said that there was no cause for grief. Godhead alone knows what is to happen on any day. I would dine on any fruits, roots or such other food that may be in the house. Be pleased to give the same to me. But Misra would not hear. If you indeed regard me as your servant, he said, be pleased to cook the meal once again. Allow me to make ready the place. I have got everything necessary for your cooking in the house. I shall, indeed, be very glad if you cook once more. Other relatives and well-wishers of Misra joined in the entreaty. The importunity of so many persons had its effect and induced the pilgrim to agree to cook again. This time, in order to keep the child out of harm's way, Sachi Devi took him to a neighbor's house. The ladies did not forego such an excellent opportunity of reading a good lesson to the child. "Well, Nimai," they said, "you are so foolish that you ate the rice that was cooked by a stranger. You will be an outcast for this. What will you do now?" The boy laughed and made this strange answer: "I am a cowboy. I eat the rice cooked by Brahmanas at all time." He looked at them with an arch smile. The reply had its effect. They all burst into uproarious laughter and pressed the child to their bosom. The benign spiritual power of God prevented them from understanding the actual meaning of his words. That pilgrim Brahmana, after cooking a second time, sat down to make the offering to Krishna. He meditated on the cowboy. Nimai again appeared before the pilgrim, having eluded the vigilance of all watchers, and ate a handful of the cooked rice, which was duly perceived only by the Brahmana, who at once shouted out with grief. This gave the alarm to Misra, who detected the boy as he ran away after eating the rice. Misra took up a stick and gave chase, but the boy took refuge inside one of the rooms in great fear. Misra was not to be pacified by the entreaties of anybody. The pilgrim Brahmana himself again interposed. "Krishna," he said, "has not allotted cooked rice for me today. This is the real truth, I tell you. The boy is not to blame at all." This did not allay the poignant grief of Misra, who remained silent and thoughtful. At this point Viswarup appeared on the scene. The beauty of his person was only equaled by his knowledge of all the scriptures and his unbounded devotion to Krishna. The very sight of Viswarup was a revelation to the pilgrim, who regarded his appearance with great attention and frequently looked at him with unconcealed admiration. He inquired his parentage and warmly congratulated Misra on the possession of such a son. Viswarup made obeisance to the Brahmana. His words were extraordinarily sweet. He said that it was, indeed, very great good fortune that had brought a person who finds all his delight in his own soul as guest to their house. There could be no greater calamity than if this guest had to fast in the house against his will. He felt it a great grief, although he was very glad by seeing him. The Brahmana said that he lived in the forest and was habituated to a diet of roots and fruits. He felt amply rewarded by having the sight of Viswarup. He would take any article of food that had been offered to Krishna. Viswarup said that a person like the pilgrim Brahmana naturally cared only for the happiness of others in preference to his own. Viswarup was, therefore, emboldened to make the request that he would be pleased to cook a third time. The Brahmana said that the will of Krishna in the matter was supreme and it had been very clearly declared. It was also almost midnight. He had already cooked twice. As it was not clearly the will of Krishna that he should eat cooked rice that day, he entreated to be excused any further useless exertion and would accept fruits and roots as his repast for that night. But Viswarup fell at the feet of the Brahmana and repeated the entreaty of himself and of the whole family that he would cook once again for the sake of Krishna. The pilgrim had been thoroughly bewitched by the beauty and grace of Viswarup. He willingly consented to cook a third time amidst the shouts of Hari, Hari that were raised by all present. The place was quickly cleansed and everything was made ready for his cooking. This time very special care was taken to prevent further mischief by Nimai. He had already hidden himself inside one of the rooms. On the advice of those present, Misra had the door of the room securely bound from outside. Misra himself guarded the entrance of the room. The ladies at last announced that there was no further cause for anxiety, as the child had fallen asleep. But they did not relax their vigilance. At last the cooking of the Brahmana was finished, and, having arranged the meal, that Brahmana of excellent deeds offered the same to Krishna in meditation. All the people had by this time fallen into a deep slumber. The son of Sachi Devi again appeared on the spot where the Brahmana was making his offering of food to Gopala. On catching sight of the boy, the Brahmana made a great noise, but no one heard his cries. The Lord said, "Vipra, you are so generous. You ask me to come. Is it my fault? Repeating my mantram you call upon me. Finding it impossible to stay away, I have thus come to you. You always long for my sight. Wherefore, I show myself to you." The Brahmana forthwith had a vision of the wonderful divine form. The figure had 8 arms which held the conch, disc, club and the lotus. There was butter in one of his hands, which he ate with another, and the Lord played on the murali, flute, with the other 2 hands. A garland of jewels and the gem kostuva adorned his breast, which was marked with footprints of Brigu. The Brahmana saw that precious ornaments decorated all parts of his body. The tail of the peacock, set in the fresh twigs of gunya, adorned his head. His red lips added to the beauty of his moon-like face. He moved his lotus eye smiling. The Vayanti garland waved to and fro, as also the Makara pendant hanging from his ears. The charming anklet, Nupura, of jewels adorned the lotus feet of the Lord. Darkness was flung back afar by the sheen of his gem-like toenails. On the self-same spot the Brahmana also saw the wonderful Kadamba tree in Brindabana, alive with the sounds of birds. He saw the cowherds and milkmaids and cows on all sides. He had direct vision of everything on which he was wont to meditate. That Brahmana of pious deeds swooned away with excess of joy on beholding splendors never seen before. Sri Gaur Sundar touched the body of the Brahmana with his hand. The touch of divine hand restored external consciousness to the Brahmana. He was rendered passive by joy, and no words came out of his mouth. He swooned away and fell on the ground repeatedly, but recovering quickly, stood up as often as he fell. No part of his body could be composed by reason of shivering, sweat, horripilation, and tears from his eyes flowed in a stream like the sacred current of the Ganges. Presently the Brahmana clasped the feet of the Lord and began to cry with a loud voice. On beholding the restlessness of the Brahmana, Sri Gaur Sundar smiled as he spoke to him briefly. The Lord said that the Brahmana is his servant in every birth and always thinks of having the sight of him. Therefore he had shown him his form. He had formerly shown his same form to the Brahmana in the home of Nanda in another birth. The Brahmana had forgot it. On that previous occasion also when Sri Gauranga had been born in the village of the cowherds, the same Brahmana, pursuing his pilgrim journeys as now, had accidentally become the guest in the home of Nanda, and the Lord then showed him the same form by stealthily eating his cooked food while in the act of offering it to Krishna. Those, who are his servants like the Brahmana, are privileged to have the sight of his divine form. He then told the Brahmana not to divulge those secrets to anyone as long as he remained manifest in this world. He also told the Brahmana that his advent takes place at the beginning of the congregational chanting, Samkirtan, and that he will spread the Samkirtan to all countries. He will give away to every household the holy love which is coveted by the gods including Brahma. The Brahmana will live to see many of those activities. With these words and assuring the Brahmana not to have any fears, the Lord returned to his own apartment, and there lay in his little bed as before, in the likeness of a child. By reason of deep slumber no one could know anything. The Brahmana was filled with supreme bliss on beholding the wonderful divine manifestation. He besmeared his body with the cooked rice, cried as he ate, danced, sang, laughed and roared with delight. He repeatedly ejaculated haste to the boy Krishna, Gopala. The noise made by the Brahmana at last woke up everybody when he restrained himself and finished his meal by the customary performance, Akaman. The first impulse of the Brahmana was to make a clean breast of everything to all the people, so that they might be delivered by recognizing the Lord whom they all believed to be but a mere mortal child. But he desisted from this rashness on remembering his promise made to the Lord not to divulge anything. This fortunate Brahmana thereupon took up his permanent abode in Nabadwip and daily visited his cherished divinity at the home of Jagannath Misra on the conclusion of his day's begging. The beatific vision is different from ordinary seeing. The Brahmana thought that if only he proclaimed what he had actually seen to all the people, they would implicitly believe in his words and be saved by knowing the infant son of Jagannath Misra as the Lord of the world. This had been forbidden by Sri Gaur Sundar himself in anticipation. Why did he forbid such disclosure? The Lord had himself told the Brahmana that his servants alone are privileged to have the sight of the divine form. Those who are not the servants of Krishna do not see him. Knowing him is identical with seeing him. Those that are not willing to serve Krishna see only a mortal child in the son of Jagannath Misra. This hallucination can be removed only by the Lord himself, because it is his power that obscures their vision. Unless he allows them to see, they cannot see or know him as he really is. But the Lord is not unkind to them. He is full of mercy for even those who do not want to serve him. He does not show himself to them, lest they are forced to serve him through fear. He wants their willing service which alone can satisfy also themselves, because that is the really natural relationship between Krishna and Jivas. This freedom of will conferred by Krishna on Jivas, which, therefore, forms a part and parcel of their nature, is allowed free scope by the Lord in order to enable Jivas to attain the eternal, natural function of their souls by the process of free rational choice. He does not compel their choice to serve even himself, against their freedom of will. But the Jiva cannot sit idly. He must always serve to exist at all. Those who do not like to serve Krishna have to be made to serve their own deluded fancies. They hope to be able to avoid the service of Krishna by following their own selfish inclinations. Krishna freely allows them to make this experiment by providing the means for the seeming realization of their desire. His deluding energy creates this world for the purpose by his will. Those Jivas, who are averse to serve Krishna, find this world to contain more than an endless abundance of what they can conceivably want in such circumstance, viz., all varieties of means of their own selfish enjoyment. In the process of undergoing such enjoyment, they have nothing to do with Krishna as the only master to be served. They are thus offered, in fulfillment of their own choice, the vision of that potency of Krishna whose apparent function is to minister to their selfish pleasures. This is the deluding manifestation or non-Krishna which can alone be available to those who want to lord it over the divinity. The potency of Krishna, who thus appears to serve the erring fancies of disloyal souls, is the deluding power or Maya. When Krishna himself comes down in his own proper form into this world which is built for the above penal purpose by his deluding power, those jivas, who happen to be undergoing corrective enjoyment in this lower region, naturally take him to be an object of this world like the other mundane entities that they know, which are of value to them solely because they minister to their trivial selfish enjoyment. Also called service, that is so loudly advertised in this world, is only a method of procuring the good, i.e., enjoyable things of this world for oneself and other ungodly persons, for pleasing oneself. There is no place for the service of Krishna in the scheme of the selfish people of this world. The service of Krishna, the only master, is not desired at all in this world. We want to be ourselves masters of everything, including Krishna himself if possible. Our lip homage to Krishna is only a piece of pious hypocrisy. God does not perpetrate the anomaly of offering us a master, who can be no other than himself, when we want to be served. This aversion is not due to ignorance, but is an innate disposition which is the result of the abuse of our freedom of will. It is only when the will of the jiva chooses to serve the truth, i.e., Krishna, that Krishna shows his form to him in order to receive his offered service. The vision beatific is, therefore, possible only for those who have attained the highest rung of the ladder of spiritual endeavor towards the unadulterated service of the divinity. There are hypocritical visions of so-called divinity which are an ordinary device of the pseudo-yogis for deluding those worldly people who desire to see Krishna for the gratification of their senses. These pseudo-visions and miracles are by no means any infringement of the law of physical nature. They come under the law of physical nature or deluding energy as much as the ordinary events of mundane life. They are events of the mental plane. These mental powers can be obtained by the processes of pseudo-yoga and are coveted by persons who are inordinately anxious to extend their scope of selfish enjoyment. These bad people naturally fall a victim to the pervert yogis who led them to deeper depths of perdition by producing in their minds such impious hallucinations of mastery over the divinity. Krishna has his eternal divine form, but his form is not like those images of God that are set up in the shrines of worldlings for the gratification of fallen jivas. The true form of Krishna is all pure and spiritual and can, by his nature, be seen only by those who are themselves free from all worldly taint. This caution of the scripture should serve as a much-needed warning to all educated and high-born people who are specially liable to accept the assurances of pseudo-yogis and pseudo-sadhus to be enabled to obtain the sight of the divinity even in their sinful state. The process of spiritual progress has its strict gradations which bear a close analogy to those of mental progress. The really moral state is the natural condition of the jiva. An immoral or non-moral person is far worse than a brute. This moral condition is the highest ideal of his position conceivable by man as attainable by his empiric thinking and activities based thereon. The spiritual, indeed, transcends the ideal moral, but not in the sense that it transgresses against the so-called moral law, because by such transgression man is only degraded to the condition which is worse than even that of the brute. The spiritual life enables us to realize the moral as a secondary result. The spiritual fulfills the moral ideal by transcending it. Morality can neither be understood nor perfected in practice by the empiric efforts of man. Its ideal is attainment of perfect purity of body and mind. This ideal, the scriptures tell us, can be automatically attained only if it is made a secondary, and not the primary, object of life, as it happens to be the case with all really immoral people. The perfection of morality is realized as a secondary consequence of serving Krishna and not as a reward of endeavors for the satisfaction of our senses in our temporary worldly sojourn. Those who serve Krishna are alone necessarily and perfectly moral or free from the evils of the flesh. Those who are not perfectly moral in this real sense are not spiritual at all and have no right of entry into Sri Brindavana, the transcendental abode of the divinity. But the deluding power of God misleads immoral people through the agency of immoral yogis by showing them a false form resembling that of Godhead as a means of punishing them for such impious desire of making God an object of the gratification of their senses. This punishment is a real mercy to such people and is intended to cure them of their rankathism. It is, therefore, necessary to confront one's so-called spiritual experiences with the authority of the scriptures and the corroboration of real sadhus who do not desire to aggrandize themselves at our expense before they are admitted by our serving disposition as genuine. The unambiguous advice on such matters is obtainable only from Srimad Bhagavatam and in the only intelligible form from the career of Sri Caitanya as described by his associates, who is the living embodiment of the eternal religion described in the Bhagavatam. The other scriptures avoid the concrete presentation of the truth, lest he be condemned or disbelieved by those who are deliberately averse to him. The rationale of theism is furnished by the Vaishnava philosophy, which is unique in the world, in its positive aspect. The associates and loyal followers of Sri Caitanya have left an ample exposition of the philosophy of the religion of the Bhagavata in the clearest possible language. But even so, it is suicidal to attempt to understand the highest spiritual principles without availing ourselves of the aid that has been so mercifully placed within our reach by Godhead himself. The attitude of neglect of the transcendental subject is often due to ignorance, prejudice and irreverence. The two former obstacles can be overcome only by one's own endeavors, but the last is incurable except by grace. There cannot well be a greater hypocrite than one who professes the desire of seeing Krishna but has no absolute regard for those perfectly loyal souls who admit no other legitimate function except the service of Godhead. It is for this sufficient reason that Godhead himself has ordained that by submitting to his devotees, not once nor twice but constantly and eternally with body, mind and speech, that anyone can have real access to his presence. It is, however, this very dictum of the scriptures, intended for ensuring devotion to Godhead, that is exploited by the knaves and atheists under the external garb of sadhus for passing off the different forms of pseudo-service on willing worldly people for the gratification of their diabolical atheistical purposes, which are destructive of even ordinary morality. Chapter V. Growing Boy. The Lord occupied himself with these juvenile pastimes after the manner of Gopala, cowboy Krishna. Meanwhile, the proper time for the performance of the ceremony of making the boy begin his studies having arrived, Jagannath Misra chose an auspicious day and moment for putting the writing chalk into the hands of his boy to initiate him into the art of reading, writing and arithmetic. This is one of the 10 purificatory ceremonies enjoined by the scriptures as necessary to be observed by the Brahmanas. Sometime after the ceremony, all friends of the family gathered together to perform the next purificatory rites, viz. Perforation of the ears and tonsure. The perforation of the ears is to make possible hearing of the word of Godhead or the attainment of the fitness of listening to words regarding the highest good, as distinct from ordinary non-spiritual utterances. The making of the tuft known as the tongue of fire in the Vedas or subsequently as teaching of Sri Caitanya Siksha, is another of the 10 lustrations. Mayavadins, illusionist monists, who believe in non-activity, admit the value of the tuft only in the sphere of work which is illusory and, accordingly, in the long run, shave off the tuft on renouncing all activity. But the Vedic theistic renunciation of the triple staff, Tridanda, does not dispense with the tuft which, in this case, is emblematic of progress in the sphere of the service of Godhead, even in the stage of sannyasa. Sri Caitanya read all the letters of the alphabet at the first sight, to the amazement of everybody. He finished all the compound letters in 2 or 3 days and began to write constantly the series of the names of Krishna. He wrote and read aloud, night and day, with the greatest ardor, the holy names of Rama, Krishna, Murari, Mukunda, Vanamali, etc. The fortunate people of Nadia actually saw the Lord of Vaikuntha reading in the company of their children. The sweetness with which the Lord articulates the letters has power to steal the hearts of all Jivas if they have only a chance of listening to him. Sri Gaurasundar engaged in diverse kinds of strange frolics, and his demands were always most difficult to satisfy. He would ask to have the bird which flew across the sky and the moon and stars of the firmament, and would cry violently, rolling in the dust and dashing his hands and legs against the ground, if his wishes were not fulfilled. All present would take him up into their arms to console him, but Viswambhar always proved intractable and went on crying, "I must have it." There was only one sovereign remedy to stop him. He was hushed the moment he heard the name of Hari. All of them recited aloud the name of Hari by clap of hand. This at once quieted the child who forgot all his turbulence. They chanted the name of Hari to please the boy, and the home of Jagannath was turned into the realm of Vaikuntha. It is necessary to guard against a possible error. That which is not the abode of Godhead should not be supposed to be convertible into the same by chanting the name of Hari. Such speculation, theologically dubbed as transubstantiation, applies only to mental and physical phenomena. The non-spiritual is never turned into the spiritual. Godhead dwells eternally in the pure spiritual essence, which is the manifestation of his spiritual power, eternally distinct from the play of his deluding energy. The home of Jagannath Misra, in which the Lord appears, is never within the jurisdiction of the deluding power of Godhead. One day Nimai began to cry violently. The child was not quieted even by the chant of the name of Hari, but kept on crying. After even method of consoling the boy had failed, they implored him to tell them the cause of his grief, promising to procure whatever he desired. The Lord replied that he was very ill and lacked the strength to move or be quiet. If they really wanted to save his life, they must hasten to the house of two Brahmanas, Jagadish Pandit and Hiranya Pandit. Those two had prepared a great variety of offerings for Vishnu on that day, which was the Ekadasi Tithi or the Lord's Day. If they could get from them all those offerings and give them to him, he would be cured of his ailment by feeding on those things. The mother was shocked to hear, thinking it was opposed to custom and the scriptures for anyone to desire to eat offerings intended for Vishnu, and that also on the Ekadasi day. But the others only burst into merry laughter at these words of the child and assured him that they would send for the offerings immediately, so he need have no anxiety on that account anymore. Jagannath Misra himself went down to the house of those two Brahmanas who happened to be his most intimate friends. He told them what the boy so imperatively wanted. Those two Brahmanas were struck with a sudden wonder on hearing the strange proposal. They thought within themselves, "This is most wonderful for a little boy. How could he know at all that this is the day of Sri Hari? How could he know that we have prepared today a great variety of offerings? This makes it perfectly clear to us that Gopala, cowboy Krsna, himself dwells in the figure of this beautiful boy. Narayana himself sports in the frame of this child. Maybe it is he who makes him say these words from his seat in the heart of the child." Thinking in this way, those two Brahmanas were filled with supreme joy, and at once with the greatest pleasure they brought out all their offerings intended for Vishnu and themselves conveyed them to the home of Jagannath Misra. They offered them with the greatest delight to Nimai and pressed him to eat everything, giving out that all their preparations were at last really offered to Krishna himself. The Lord was very much pleased on receiving the offerings and tasted a little of everything. His distemper was completely healed. He became as naughty and restless as ever, scattering the eatables in all directions and throwing bits of them at those who stood in a circle round him and chanted the name of Hari as he danced in the midst of the Samkirtan of himself. It is the custom of the Vaishnavas not to eat anything on the day of Ekadasi. This does not apply to the Lord himself, to whom accordingly the usual offerings of food are made on the Ekadasi day also. Those Brahmanas must have offered the food to Nimai in the firm belief that the boy was no other than Krishna, for whom the offerings had been prepared. Such instinctive good sense, observes Thakur Brindabandas in this connection, is only possible to one who obtains the special mercy of Krishna. Devotion to the Lord does not make her appearance in the heart as long as the worldly egotistic attitude persists. One who gives up all reliance upon his own powers and humbly seeks enlightenment from Krishna himself, or, in other words, becomes his willing servant, obtains the mercy of Krishna in the shape of devotion to the feet of the Lord. To the worldly egotist all this is utterly incomprehensible. The sudden resolve of the Brahmanas to offer the eatables to Nimai, instinctively believing him to be Vishnu himself for whom they had been prepared, is a circumstance which cannot be properly grasped by anyone except the servants of Krishna. The reader may be reminded of the fact already noted that when the Lord appears in this world, he comes down with his eternal associates, servitors and paraphernalia. This descent of the Lord serves his merciful purpose of bringing the divine realm within the vision of fallen souls, thereby affording them the opportunity of serving himself. The narrative of such activities preserved in the language of this world continues to provide the same opportunity for all succeeding generations. But the abode, associates, servitors, paraphernalia, narratives, although they appear to us like the things of this earth, are really spiritual entities, being of the divine essence. The Lord ever sports with his own. He is ever manifest in the pure spiritual essence, and all his activities take place on the plane of the pure soul. His activities manifesting themselves in this world also possess the same spiritual nature. The Lord in his real, positive or spiritual nature is knowable and servable by pure souls alone. This material world is the shadow of the spiritual world. If the soul seeks the Lord in this world, he is perpetually deluded and is forced to arrive at the conclusion sooner or later, if he is really sincere in his quest of the truth, that he is not to be found in this world. Less sincere people think that they can find him in this world. But when the Lord actually appears in this world, these insincere people either ignore him, thinking that he is an ordinary mortal, or, even if they are told of his divinity, miss the real view of him, believing him to be Godhead in the guise of mortal and subject to the imperfections of the flesh, as by such process of incarnation alone he is wrongly imagined to be able to make himself visible to the fettered souls. The first is the frankly skeptical attitude that ignores altogether all possibility of spiritual existence. The second is no less fatal. It supposes that Godhead may be subject to the bondage of Maya, that Godhead may appear in this world as an actually sinful person and may engage in all worldly activities in the same way as we do. That such sinful activities of Godhead are not sinful, that it is the duty of fallen souls to submit to these sinful pastimes of the Lord in his human form, and that by such submission alone they can attain to the highest object of life. This is philanthropism, or the doctrine of Prakriti Sahaja sects, which is responsible, in some form or other, for all the corruptions of all current spurious creeds that profess to be theistic. The true view is that the Lord, even when he chooses to be visible to the mortal eye, is nothing less than the Lord in his fullness, because he is always all-powerful, always all-pure, always all-knowledge. Those alone can join in his activities who share his nature, who is spiritual and incapable of corruption. That is to say, no sinful person can really see, understand or participate in his activities. The soul that is averse to Godhead, if by dint of the awakened sincerity of his nature he is convinced that no connection with the Lord can be established so long as the sinful condition itself persists, is enabled to obtain deliverance from the bondage of this world by witnessing with faith, by studying with faith, and by listening with faith to the narratives of these activities from the lips of the servants of the Lord, by serving with faith those from whom he receives the tidings, the Lord, his associates and servitors, his abode, the narrative of his activities, although they choose to be visible in this world from time to time, have nothing in common with anything of this world and are incapable of receiving the least stain of worldliness by their descent into this world. Those who think otherwise are utterly misguided and are profane atheists, as they imagine that the Lord is only a created being like their false selves and possessing a similar liability to mundane defect and merits. But the scriptures say that there is no greater slander of the all-pervasive Vishnu than to affect to believe that the body of Vishnu is material. If this point is properly understood, there would be no chance of impostors, full of all the worst vices of humanity, setting up as incarnations of Godhead and by their sinful activities and spurious performances bringing about the terrible ruin of themselves and their unfortunate victims. Lord Vishwambhar continued to be exceedingly restless and wayward. He became the leader of all the turbulent Brahmana boys of the neighborhood. He and his company were constantly after some mischief or other and engaged in a campaign of regular raids on different places. No one could check his turbulence. He would cut jokes at other children whenever he chanced to meet them. They would also retort, till the affair developed into a regular fray. The boys of the Lord's party were always victorious in these quarrels by reason of the superior strength of the Lord, and their opponents found themselves compelled to retire discomfited. At this period Sri Gaur Sundar had the most charming appearance. He was always grey with dust and his body was beautifully adorned with points of writing ink. After study was over at midday, Sri Gaur Sundar, in the company of all the children, went daily for his bath in the Ganges. As soon as he got into the water, he engaged in merry sports in the water with the children who splashed water at one another. Nabadwap was a most opulent city, and the number of bathers at each bathing place baffled all calculation. They included very staid persons, respectable and great fathers of families, and revered sannyasins, as well as a very large number of urchins. The Lord, sporting in the company of the children, soon attracted the attention of everybody by the extraordinary beauty of his person and by his turbulence. As the Lord played with the children, the shower of water from his feet drenched all bathers. He paid no attention to the expostulations of the aggrieved parties and moved about so quickly from place to place that no one could catch hold of him. In this manner the Lord made everybody bathe over and over again. He would touch some of the bathers and even spouted the water by his mouth at them. The Brahmanas, who were also treated in this unorthodox fashion, unable to catch hold of the turbulent boy, at last went to Jagannath Misra and laid before him their grievances. It was impossible for anyone to bathe in the proper manner in the Ganges. Shri Sundar disturbed one's meditations by the summary method of deliberately dashing the water at him or by spouting water at a person in the act of meditation for the avowed reason that it was unnecessary to meditate anymore, as one could actually see him on whom he meditated, by simply opening his eyes, standing before him, he himself being Narayana manifest in the Kali age. The boy, it was alleged, stole one's phallic symbol of Siva and decamped with the upper cloth of another. He occupied the seat prepared for Vishnu, ate all the offerings and put on his own person the flowers, etc., while the owner of them was engaged in his bath preparatory to worship, and ran away before he could be prevented, and would retort, into the bargain, that one need not feel sorry at all, as he himself, for whom the offering is meant, has eaten the same. Thereafter, coming forward unobserved by diving under the water, he would drag away a bather by the legs, as he was engaged in performing his sandhya standing up in the water. The flower basket and loin cloth of another were always missing. The jita of one bather was stolen. He had made the baby boy of another cry by putting water into the ears of the child. He had climbed one's back to his shoulder and from there jumped back into the water, crying, "I am Mahesha." He himself worshipped Vishnu by occupying the seat arranged for worship by another. After having first eaten the intended offering, he threw sand at one's body, after one had finished his bath and had for the purpose all the naughty boys at his heels. He put the cloths of all male persons in the place of those of females and vice versa, to the utter shame of all who put on the wrong cloths. This was done every day. He did not get out of the water for half the day. Was it not likely that he might fall ill? These brahmanas were not the only complainants. The girls had serious grievances which they duly laid before Sachi Devi. He stole their cloths, abused them and got up a quarrel if they protested. He forcibly took away all the flowers and fruits brought by them for performing their vowed worships, brata, and scattered them in all directions. As, after bathing in the Ganges, the girls began to worship the gods, Nimai would appear on the spot with the other children and took his seat in the midst of the girls. He asked the maidens to worship him and told them that he would give them the boon they desired, that Ganga and Durga are his maidservants and Mahesha is also only his servant. With his own hands he put the sandal paste on his own person, wore the garlands of flowers, snatched the intended offerings from the girls and ate them. The girls were very indignant and said that he was their brother by the relationship of the village. It was not proper for them to say all this against him. But he should also not take away their articles for the worship of the gods and should not be boisterous in his behavior. To this he would only say, "I give the boon to all of you. The husbands of you all will be most beautiful, learned, adept, youthful and possessing an abundance of grain and other riches. Every one of you will have 7 sons apiece, all of whom will live forever and be of an excellent understanding." The girls were much pleased at heart on hearing about the boon, although externally they took up the scolding attitude by the display of false anger. Some of the girls ran away with their offerings. Nimai, however, called out to them and angrily told them that if they proved miserly and did not give him their offerings, they would have old husbands with 4 co-wives. They were extremely frightened on hearing this, lest he might possess some supernatural art or be possessed by any deity. They accordingly brought their offerings back to him. The Lord ate those offerings and then gave them the boon which they desired. He threw sand at their bodies after they had finished their bath, and this was done by him at the head of all the naughty children. Coming up unobserved, he shouted into one's ear with a loud voice. He spouted water with his mouth at one's face. He stuck the prickly seeds of okra into the hair of a third. He wanted to marry some. He did this every day, as if he was the son of the king. Nimai, they alleged, acted exactly as the son of Nanda in old times. If he was not checked, they would be compelled someday to tell their parents, and then there would be serious trouble. On hearing all this, the mother of the Lord smiled and, taking all of them on her lap, spoke kindly to them. "Let Nimai come home today. I will tie up his hands and feet and punish him, so that he may not again cause any trouble to you." Then the girls, after taking the dust of Sachi's feet on their heads, made their way once more to the Ganges for their bath. But, as a matter of fact, all concerned were exceedingly pleased in their minds, however wayward might be the conduct of the Lord towards them, by the force of the actual benefit dispensed. They came to Misra to acquaint him with those occurrences, only for the fun of it. Misra, however, took their complaints seriously and spoke threateningly and with anger. He constantly behaves in this way to all persons and has made it impossible for anyone to bathe in the Ganges in a satisfactory manner. I must immediately go there myself and give him a good thrashing that he may never do this again. If all of you try, you will not prevent me from punishing him. Gauranga, the Lord of all beings, was aware of all this. He knew it all as soon as Misra was on his way to the Ganges with an angry mind. He was then playing with other children, easily recognizable among them all by his extraordinary beauty. The girls were the first to inform him. They said, "Be careful, Vishwambhar, Misra will be coming just now, fly at once." As the Lord, taking all the children with him, ran to catch hold of them, those Brahmana maidens scattered in a fright. The Lord now instructed all his companions to tell Misra that his son had not come to bathe at all. He had gone home from school by the other road. They were waiting for his coming for his bath. After coaching the boys in this manner, the Lord returned home by another path. The good Misra now appeared at the bathing place of the Ganges. On reaching the spot, Misra eagerly looked about in all directions but could not find his son in the midst of the children. Misra asked them about the whereabouts of Vishwambhar. The children readily replied, "He has not come to bathe today. He went home by the other road after school. We are all waiting here for him." Misra, with stick in hand, peered in all directions and stormed and threatened, being unable to find his boy. Those Brahmanas, who had complained to him for fun, now came forward and informed him that Vishwambhar had fled home for fear. And they entreated Misra to return home but not say any unkind words to the boy, telling him that they themselves would catch and take the boy to him if he again did any mischief. "What we had told you," was said in fun. "There is no one in the three worlds who is more fortunate than yourself. What can hunger, thirst or sorrow do to him in whose home there happens to be such a child? You alone have truly served the feet of the Lord. Most fortunate, indeed, is he who has such a son. If Vishwambhar commits crores of mischief, hold him fast to your bosom." Misra said, "That child is the son of you all. Swear by me that you will never be offended with him." And then Misra embraced them all and came back home. Lord Vishwambhar had gone home by another path, with the beautiful books in his hands, looking like a second moon. Points of writing ink adorned all parts of his body, as if the champaka flower was besieged on all sides by the black bees. The Lord began to call loudly on his mother, asking for oil to rub his body for going to the Ganges for his bath. The voice of her son gladdened the heart of Sachi. She could not discover any sign of bath on his person. She gave him oil and began to muse. "I do not understand what those girls and the Brahmana said just now. His body is still spotted with the marks of ink and he has the same books and the same cloth." Presently, Misra also returned home. Vishwambhar ran into the arms of Misra as soon as he caught sight of him. By that embrace Misra lost all faculty of his external activity, having been filled with happiness at the very sight of his boy. Misra also noticed that his son's whole body was full of dust and was astonished on finding no sign of bath. Misra said, "Vishwambhar, is this your good sense? Why don't you allow the people to bathe? Why do you steal the offerings for the worship of Vishnu? Are you not afraid even of Vishnu?" The Lord said, "I have not gone for my bath today. My companions have gone there before me. They misbehave to all the people. People blame me even when I am not really there. If they thus slander me when I am absent, I say truly that I will really treat them ill." With these words the Lord ran away laughing to the side of the Ganges to bathe and rejoin those children. As soon as they saw Vishwambhar in their midst, all the children embraced him and burst into uproarious laughter on hearing of his ruse. They all praised his cleverness and congratulated him on his narrow escape and resumed their pastimes in the water. Here at home Sachi and Jagannath cogitated over the affair. What all those people said cannot be false. Why then was there no sign of bath on his person? The same dusty body, the same dress, books, cloth and hair. Is it possible Vishwambhar is no mortal? Has Krsna himself been born as our son by his own power, or some transcendental person? While they were thinking in this manner, the crest jewel of all the twice-born made his appearance. Their deliberations were ended by joy at the sight of their son. Both were filled with instinctive gladness and all suspicions were laid at rest. Half the day, while the Lord was away for his study, seemed to those two as a couple of ages. In this manner played the Lord of Vaikuntha, and by his own contrivance not a single person was able to recognize him. Those who put up with the almost intolerable turbulences of this strikingly beautiful urchin certainly possessed a more than ordinary share of patience and of the truly aesthetic and tender sentiment. A naughty boy is most liked if his naughtiness is purely juvenile and the outcome of an abundance of the pure childish energy. It is in this sense that the extraordinary events of the childhood of Sri Gaur Sundar have been affected to be regarded by his empiric admirers. But the point of view of the associates and narrators of the transcendental deeds of the Lord is altogether different, and it is their point of view which will give us the attitude of those who were taught the true relation between the religion and his own illustrative conduct by Sri Caitanya himself. And they had also the opportunity of realizing the absolute truth of those statements by their actual experience. The sum and substance of their attitude is that these pranks of the childhood of Sri Gaur Sundar, who was by far the most turbulent of all the naughty children who then abounded at Nabadwip, were not only tolerated, but they made all those who were the victims of his turbulence have an extraordinary affection for the child, whom a few fortunate persons also regarded as transcendental. It is on this historical fact that a momentous generalization in regard to these activities has been made to rest, viz. That when Godhead himself appears in this world, he comes here with his divine associates and abode, and these alone are the directly incorporated helpers of his Leela in this world. All those persons who had anything to do with the activities of Sri Gaur Sundar are the eternal associates and servants of the Lord, who came into this world for the purpose of participating in his activities. But they themselves did not know this fully, as such knowledge would take away the possibility of those activities. So their knowledge was to that extent modified by the spiritual power of Godhead. This apparent obscuration of knowledge that is thus found in his devotee serves to augment the joy of his pastimes, and is totally different from the effect of the operation of the deluding power that shuts out the view of the divinity from fallen souls of this world by the screen of the material world. The philanthropists do not understand this vital difference between the apparently similar functions of the two distinct powers, and confound the spiritual with the worldly. The result of such ignorance is also most deplorable. A large number of rascals have in all ages set up as incarnations, the term is theirs, of the divinity, and have imitated the activities, the real avatars narrated in the scriptures. The unbelievable boldness and shamelessness of these incarnations have captured the credulity of even sensuously disposed cultured people, who have fallen easy victims to their own immoral designs. These events in their turn have reacted on the beliefs of the more moral sections, and have unfortunately enough served to shake their belief in spiritual claims of any kind. This is the psychology of the sceptics and impersonalists, whose condition is not otherwise different from their deluded immoral brethren, who are actually misled to accept the worst forms of vice as the means of attaining the promised spiritual condition. Both these deluded groups remain necessarily confined to worldly activities which are, by their very nature, offensive to Godhead, the one through undue credulity and the other through undue incredulity regarding one's imperative spiritual duty. True belief in Godhead is spontaneous and, in its natural form, is very rare in this world. Those who really believe in God are thereby freed from all worldliness. The conduct of perfectly pure souls cannot be understood so long as we remain in the condition that is dominated by the sensuous outlook. The only way of getting out of the sad plight is to gradually acquire faith in spiritual existence by listening to the accounts of the transcendental activities of the Lord in his different avatars from the lips of true sadhus, who alone can prevent us from falling into the errors of the misguided philanthropists, prakrita sahajiyas on the one hand, and sceptics and atheists on the other. The plight that would befall us if we try to understand those accounts in the light which is really obscuring of our sensuous understanding. The boy continued to be a source of trouble to all the neighbors. They complained to Sachi that the boys stole their things and beat their little children. On hearing this, Sachi scolded Nimai and ordered him to remain always at home and never to go to anyone's house. This so much angered the Lord that he forthwith ran into the house and smashed all the earthen pots that he found there. Then Sachi took him into her arms, and he was pleased and felt ashamed for his naughtiness. One day he struck Sachi gently with his hands and wept when she fainted away, being so struck. The women who nursed Sachi said that if he could get green coconuts, his mother would recover. The Lord immediately went out of the house and returned with 2 green coconuts. This feat astonished everybody, as the green coconut was a rare fruit at Srimapur and almost impossible to procure at that time of the year. One day as Sachi lay in her couch with her son, she beheld that the house was filled with celestial beings. Sachi asked Nimai to call his father. As he was leaving the room to fetch his father, the tinkling sound of anklet Nupura distinctly proceeded from his feet. Misra told Sachi that he actually heard the sound of Nupura coming from the bare feet of the child. Sachi said that she had a most strange experience. She had beheld that the courtyard of the house was thronged by a great crowd of celestial beings. She did not understand the noise that they made, but could infer that they must have been chanting hymns of praise to someone. Misra said that there was no cause for anxiety, whatever happened. He only desired the welfare of Vishwambhar. Another day, on noticing the wayward nature of the boy, Misra scolded him very severely and tried to instill in him the principles of orderliness enjoined by religion. That night Misra had a dream in which he beheld that a Brahmana came to him and told him with an angry voice that he did not know at all the real truth regarding his son, and it was owing to his ignorance that he scolded and punished him under the impression that he was, indeed, his son and protege. Whereupon Misra said that whatever the child might be in himself, even if he were a god, a self-realized soul, siddha, a contemplative sage, muni, or howsoever great a personage, he was still only his own boy to him. It was the specific duty of a father to teach and maintain his son. If he did not tell him about it, how would the boy know the meaning of religion? The Brahmana said that if the child was perfect in all knowledge by the grace of Godhead himself and possessed spontaneous omniscience, then his teaching must be perfectly useless. Whereupon Misra said that it was still the duty of the father to teach his son, even if he happened to be Narayana himself. They discoursed in this way, Misra ignoring all other considerations and trying to uphold the point of view of the parent. That Brahmana was at last satisfied and took his leave of Misra with great pleasure. Misra told all his friends about his dream and all of them were very much surprised to hear of it. Chapter V. Growing Boy continued. Shri Gaur Sundar pursued his studies at the Academy of Gangadas Pandit with great zeal. He soon acquired a great proficiency in the Sutra, Panji and Tika of Vyakarana. One day the Lord, making obeisance to the feet of his mother, begged for a boon from her. Having made mother promise to give him whatever boon he desired, the Lord said that she was to promise that she would not eat cooked grain, annam, on the Lord's day, Ekadasi. Sachi agreed to follow his advice and from that day, observed the Ekadasi fast. In this manner Shri Gaur Sundar continued to manifest himself in various ways under the guise of childhood pastimes. He was extremely turbulent and restless and paid no heed to the expostulations of his mother who tried to teach him to be quiet. The warnings and entreaties of his mother seemed only to increase his waywardness. He used to break whatever article of the house he could lay his hands on. The parents, for fear of further mischief, gave up all attempt to oppose him, to the great joy of the child, who was thereby afforded an opportunity of unrestrained play. Nimai soon ceased to be afraid of all persons, including his parents. The only person, whom he still feared, was his elder brother, Viswarup, whose very sight made him exceedingly meek. Viswarup had no attachment for the things of this world even from his birth. He devoted all his time to discourses about Krishna. He served Krishna with the ear, mouth, mind and all senses, and served only Krishna at all time. Viswarup was struck by the habits of his younger brother, which were altogether different from those of ordinary children. He realized the conduct of Nimai as identical with that of boy Krishna. He was aware of the transcendental divine nature of the boy in whose form he could detect the presence of sportive Krishna. Viswarup was, however, careful not to divulge his knowledge regarding his brother to anyone else. He was in fact always intent on his own devotions, was constantly in the company of the Vaishnavas and was wholly occupied with the joy of Krishna talk, Krishna devotion and Krishna worship. This aloofness of Viswarup from the world increased apace by the reaction of his godless surroundings. The people of Nadia of that time, as has already been noted, were inordinately and exclusively given to the pursuit of worldly objects. This was the condition not merely of the vulgar, illiterate mass, but also of the most highly educated people. The acknowledged headquarters of all learning of the country of that age was absolutely devoid of love for God. The teachers of the Bhagavatam themselves were no exception to the rule. These also neither understood, practiced, nor explained the principles of devotion to Godhead and were equally mad after wives, wealth and fame. It was this godless atmosphere of the emporium of learning, abounding in luxuries of all kinds, that appeared to Viswarup to be so stifling and unbearable that he at last made up his mind to leave the place for good, to avoid the sight of such people. Meanwhile he scrupulously avoided all association with the ungodly. He used to bathe in the Ganges very early in the morning and proceeded immediately to the gathering of the Vaishnavas at the house of Advaita. There he explained all the Shastras showing how all scriptures proclaimed the supreme excellence of devotion to Krishna. His explanations gave so much pleasure to Advaita that he often broke off abruptly in the midst of his worship with thundering shouts of joy and would clasp Viswarup to his bosom amid the joyous chants of the name of Hari by all assembled devotees moved to raptures by the edifying spectacle. The devotees assembled at Advta's house spent their time in the greatest happiness, and no one was minded to return to his home or leave the company of Viswarup. Neither would Viswarup ever come home from his companions. After cooking his meal, Sachi Devi would ask Vishwambhar to fetch his brother from the gathering at Advta's. The Lord appeared before the assembly in the midst of Krishna talk of those devotees. Pleased with their discourse regarding himself, the Lord would bend his auspicious glance on his devotees as he asked his brother to come home for his meal. He then took hold of his brother's cloth and led him away from the place. On every such occasion the devotees felt the wonderful attraction of the child. They remained silent, abstaining even from Krishna talk all the time the boy was in their midst. They noticed with rapt attention every detail of the beautiful limbs of the nude child and every motion of his body, and drank with the greatest joy his luscious accents. And, after Vishwambhar had left the place, the great Advta told them one day that he was unable to understand who that boy really was. Advta had realized that he was no ordinary child. The subject has been treated in a remarkable dialogue between Sri Sukha and King Parikshit in the Bhagavatam. When this very Gorchandra, says Thakur Brindabandas, was born in the settlement of the cowherds as Sri Krishna, all the cowherds loved him from his birth more tenderly than they loved even their own sons. They did not know that Krishna was Godhead himself, yet they naturally loved him more than their own sons. King Parikshit desired Sri Sukadeva to explain how this was possible, as it was opposed to all experience of this world. Sri Sukha said that there is nothing dearer to our souls than the great soul of all souls. The son of Sri Nanda is the supreme soul. Therefore, the milkmaids of Braj had greater love for Krishna, as he is the supreme soul himself. But this also holds true only in the case of the devotees, as otherwise, all the world would have loved Krishna. Kamsa and other atheists, asuras, bore malice against Krishna, although Krishna is also the soul of their souls, by the effect of offenses against him previously committed by them. Sugar is naturally sweet, but there are some who find its taste bitter by reason of the defect of their own tongues. The fault is of the tongue, not of sugar. Therefore, says Thakur Brindabandas, although Lord Chaitanya is really all sweet and was visible to everybody in this very town of Nabadwap, yet was he unrecognized by anyone except the devotees. The Lord ever fascinates the minds of his own devotees in every manner. This mystery is incomprehensible to the atheists. Viswarup would go home only in name and was never attached to it. While visiting home he would spend all his time there inside the chamber of worship of Vishnu. This behavior led his parents to bethink themselves of his marriage. Viswarup thereupon carried out his cherished resolve of quitting the world. The foremost of the Vaishnavas thus became a sannyasin soon after this and left home in quest of the infinite. As sannyasin, Viswarup was known by the appellation of Sri Sankararanya. These events raise a number of important issues. It is necessary to notice one of them at this place. The fascination that the divinity exercises over the minds of his devotees should not be confounded with the clouding of the faculty of judgment produced by an excess of worldly joy or sorrow. The exclusive mood of the devotees at the sight of Sri Gaurasundar and the similar moods of Sukha and Narada are not to be put into the same category with the outwardly similar exhibitions of ultra-sentimentalism exhibited by the worldlings. The latter is recognized, under the name of moha, by all the Shastras as one of the 6 evil passions, ripus, being classed with anger, lust, etc., that have to be carefully got rid of by all persons who are sincerely desirous of spiritual living. The former is the natural impulse of the pure individual soul who always experiences this spontaneous attraction for the Absolute. The genuine spiritual attraction is not a dry, abstract process. Neither does it bear any affinity to the sensuous impulse, to which our body and mind are so wrongly subject, that is exercised by the prospects of worldly enjoyment. Those who have been enabled by their love for the Absolute to overcome the sensuous attraction exercised by the material universe are thereby enabled to experience the far greater attraction of the service for Krishna. The great love of Krishna for his servants cannot be consciously realized in the conditioned state. That love for Krishna, which is possible of realization in the fettered state in this world, is somewhat analogous to the attraction that is experienced by the cows, the cane, the flute, etc. for the Lord, in the realm of Brahma. Sri Sankararanya, after acceptance of sannyas, journeyed to various parts and exhibited the state of realized exclusiveness in the Lord, Samadhi, at Pandurangpur or Pandharpur, in the Sholapur district of the Bombay Presidency. Sachi and Jagannath were most profoundly affected by the sannyas of Viswarup. Sri Gaurasundar exhibited the leela of fainting away at separation from his brother, devotee. All the people of Nadia, high and low, who ever heard of the sannyas of Viswarup, were filled with a great grief. The home of Jagannath Misra was turned into the abode of mourning. Jagannath and Sachi cried constantly on the name of Viswarup. The friends and relatives of Misra tried their best to compose him. Some of their arguments bear to be repeated here. Be quiet, Misra, said they, that great son has earned the deliverance of all his kindred. If a single member of a family accepts sannyas, 3 crores of generations of that family thereby attain to the happy realm of Vaikuntha. Your beloved son has performed a great meritorious deed. All his learning has at last been crowned with its supreme success. Rejoice greatly at this. All your sorrows will be removed by this other son of yours. Vishwambhar will be the support of the family. What are crores of sons to him whose son is he? Misra was inconsolable. He did not feel certain that the other son will also stay in the family. He could not forget the many good qualities of Viswarup. By slow degrees, however, the worthy Misra picked up patience and regained the equilibrium of his faculties. He was helped in this by his enlightened faith in Krishna. Krishna gave me the child and has now taken him away. The will of Krishna should certainly prevail. The soul of the jiva has no tittle of power of his own. I, therefore, surrender myself, my body and senses, to thee, O Krishna. The devotees experienced a clinging sorrow in the midst of their joy when they learnt of the sannyas of Viswarup. Krishna, thought they, has robbed us of the only place where we might hear the talk about him. We also will no longer stay among these people but will go into the forest where we shall not have to see the faces of these sinful persons. It is impossible to bear longer the torment of the blasphemies of these atheists. All people are constantly pursuing the evil course. We cannot convince them of their error. If we tell them of it, they only receive the statement with ridicule, saying that we are not happier than they in any way by worshipping Krishna. What is the use associating with such people? The griefs of neither Jagannath Misra nor of those devotees are of the nature of the sorrows that overtake all worldly people at the curtailment of any possibility of their selfish enjoyment. Jagannath Misra realized the true significance of the sunnis of Viswarup. His lamentations, properly understood, are really an expression of his appreciation of the transcendental nature of the son who had left him for good. This realization accordingly also affected the sannyas of Jagannath Misra himself. The language of his friends echoes the attitude of the devotees. The devotees, however, fully sympathized with the keen sorrow of Viswarup at sight of the utter godlessness of the people and appreciated the quality of Viswarup's exclusive devotion to Krishna. The tears of the devotees are always different from those shed by worldly people. The weeping of the devotees is the expression of their absorbing devotion to Krishna. The tears of worldly people are caused by their aversion to Krishna. Worldly people always think of their own personal joys and sorrows. Outwardly, the exhibitions of both seem to be identical to those who are not conscious of their categorical difference. And self-deception in this form is unfortunately by no means rare, as is proven by the sickening, neurotic performances of hypocritical philanthropists. Sri Advaita consoled the assembled devotees. He declared that they would assuredly obtain the highest bliss. He, indeed, on his part felt perfectly sure about it. He experienced a great joy in his mind. It seemed to him that Krishna Chandra himself had appeared in the world. He asked them all to sing Krishna with the utmost delight. He assured them that they would see Krishna at that very place within a short time. Krishna will display his joyous activities in the company of yourselves. Advaita, referring to himself, is a pure servant of Krishna only if this prove true. This servant of you all will gain such divine favor that seldom falls to the lot of even Sukha or Prahlada. These nectarine words of Advaita filled the devotees with great joy and restored cheerfulness to all the faculties of their minds. In their joy they shouted the name of Hari with a thundering voice. This reached the ears of Sri Gaur Sundar, who was then playing with the children. He entered Advaita's academy on hearing the sound of Hari. "What brings thee here, darling?" asked the devotees. The Lord said, "Why did you ask me to come?" With these words the Lord sped into the midst of the children. No one could understand those, by the contrivance of his divine power. It is the privilege of the pure devotee to have the sight of Krishna being served by his devotees. Sri Advaita was right in maintaining this view. The empiricists blunder hopelessly when they arrive at the conclusion, by the process of induction from their sensuous experience, that Godhead is devoid of distinct personality and activities. By trying to know Godhead by the limited faculties of the human mind, the speculative philosophers, when they care at all to take up the positive attitude, arrive at an abstract conception of Godhead, Brahman, as the antithesis of this limited and imperfect phenomenal world. This is the utmost limit, the ultima thule, of the ascending effort of the human mind from the data of sense experience. This consummation is perfectly logical. The human mind can conceive of nothing that is not limited. It, therefore, tries to arrive at the absolute simply by destroying the positive content of empiric thought. But this is neither here nor there. The revelationists realize the absolute not in this abstract form of the mundane, but as he really is. They find him as the living reality and not an abstraction of the erring mind. They are enabled to receive the knowledge of the absolute by the resuscitation of the dormant serving faculty of the soul by the grace of the absolute himself. The absolute descends into this limited world in order to reveal himself to the redeemed soul of man. When he does so, he is recognized as the absolute by his pure devotees who are eternally and divinely enlightened. Advaita, the purest of devotees, was the first among the assembled Vaishnavas to realize the descent of Krishna into the world. He also simultaneously realized that those assembled Vaishnavas were the servants of Krishna, who had appeared in the mundane world preparatory to the advent of the Lord himself. Thus the whole truth flashed on the spiritual consciousness of Advaita, and he realized in it the special mercy of Godhead towards himself in response to his single-hearted devotion. The Lord became a little quieter from the time when Viswarup renounced the family. He was now found constantly at the side of his parents, evidently for the reason that they might thereby forget their sorrow. He was also less devoted to play than before and gave more attention to his study. He did not leave his books even for a moment. His cleverness was wonderful. He puzzled all persons over every sutra by reading it only once. This became quickly known to all the people who were lavish in their praise of the excellent judgment of the child and carried the glad tidings to Jagannath Misra. You are, indeed, most fortunate in having such a son. There is not another child in all the three worlds who is possessed of his good sense. He will surpass Brihaspati himself in learning. He can explain whatever he hears, but no one can explain his puzzles. Sachi was very much delighted on hearing these praises of the good qualities of her son. But Misra was greatly dejected. He now opened his mind to Sachi. The boy would not remain in the family. The same thing would happen in his case as in that of Viswarup. It was by studying the Shastras in this manner that Viswarup became aware that the world was not true at all, and it was not worth one's while to live in it for a single moment. It was the knowledge of the transitory nature of the world that made Viswarup quit it. If this boy came to learn the real meaning of the Shastras, he also would give up all worldly pleasures. But this son of ours is the life of us both. If we do not see him, both of us will surely die. Therefore, he must have nothing to do with study. Let our Nimai only stay in the family. We do not mind if he is illiterate. Sachi at first demurred to the proposal. If he does not read anything, how will he earn his living? Will also anyone give him his daughter in marriage? Jagannath Misra told Sachi that she ought to know better, as she was the daughter of a Brahmana. Krishna is the only slayer, master and protector of everybody. The Lord of the world is the sole maintainer of the world. Who had told her that it was learning that maintained anybody? One will surely have the girl whom Krishna assigns to him, whether he be a scholar or a fool. Family, learning, etc. are only apparent helps. It is Krishna who maintains everyone. Krishna is the strength of all. He himself has all along been starving, although he is a good scholar. While the doorsteps of the most illiterate persons are thronged with hosts of begging savants. A life that is free from want and death with ease can never be the lot of a person who does not worship the feet of Govinda. These blessings are obtained by worshipping Krishna and not by learning. There can be no end of one's sorrow save by the mercy of Krishna. The possession of learning, high lineage and great riches does not make any difference. Krishna sometimes afflicts, with some virulent disease, a person whose house is full of all enjoyable things and makes it impossible for him to enjoy any of those things. Such a person is even more miserable than one who has not the wherewithal to procure those luxuries. Know this as certain that nothing of this world is of any avail. What is commanded by Krishna alone comes to pass. Therefore, you need have no anxiety for your child. I say Krishna will maintain the boy. I will not allow any sorrow to touch him, as long as there is life left in my body. Krishna is the protector of all of us. There is no anxiety for one who is the son of a loyal matron like yourself. I tell you he must not read any more. Let my son only stay with the family and be a fool. The worthy Misra called his son and told him on his oath that he must not read from that day. He assured his son that he would supply all his wants. All he had to do from now was to live at home in every comfort. Without stopping for a reply, Misra hastily left the place to attend to other works. Nimai was sorry at heart at this abrupt stoppage of the pleasures of study. But, in obedience to his father's command, he at once discontinued his studies. His waywardness, however, now increased more and more. It now passed all bounds. He did indiscriminate damage to property both in the house and elsewhere. He took particular delight in smashing everything that came in his way. Some days he stayed away whole nights amusing himself in all kinds of play with the children. 2 boys hid themselves under a piece of blanket and went about as a bull. In this fashion he and a companion broke up during the night the plant and grove of a household that he had marked out for the raid in the daytime. The inmates of the house lamented their damage under the impression that it was the doing of a bull. The Lord with the children bolted. As soon as people of the house were astir, he would bind fast the door of the house from the outside, preventing the members from attending to calls of nature. As they began to shout in a great perplexity, demanding to know who had done the deed, and tried to find out the mischief monger, the Lord decamped with his followers. The Lord was occupied in this manner night and day in the company of the children. But Misra did not utter a single word, despite all this. One day while Misra had been called away from the house on some business, the Lord, indignant at being kept out of his studies, sat on a pile of refuse earthen pots that had been cast away after being used by the family in cooking offerings for Vishnu. The soot from the sides of the pots blackened the whole body of the boy as he sat there laughing. The children of the neighborhood were not slow in conveying the tidings to Sachi Devi. Nimai, they said, is sitting on the refuse cooking pots. The mother was most disagreeably surprised on receiving this news as she hastened to the spot and found the report true. She importuned her son to come down from his unclean seat, telling him that he ought to have known at his age that it was necessary to bathe if one touched a refuse cooking pot. The Lord at first said that he could not be expected to possess the knowledge, as he was debarred from all study. All places were the same to him. He possessed no knowledge of good and evil. His knowledge was always one and the same. And when the mother repeated her remarks that he could by no means be considered clean as he sat in a dirty place, the Lord plainly told the truth to his mother. Mother, said he in the manner of a child, you are no better than an infant to speak so thoughtlessly. I never stay in any unclean place. The spot where I am is full of all holinesses. All holy tirthas, the Ganges and the rest, abide there. My cleanliness or uncleanliness is purely a matter of the deluded imagination. Ponder this well. Can there be any sin in the Creator? Even if a thing happens to be impure according to the opinion of men or of the Veda, can such impurity exist when it is touched by myself? As to these pots, there has been no cause of any uncleanliness in them, as you yourself used them for cooking the offering for Vishnu. The vessel used in cooking offerings for Vishnu is never made unclean thereby. On the contrary, the touch of pots so used sanctifies all places. For all these reasons I am not staying in any bad place. The purity of all things is due to my touch. The Lord laughed in the mood of a child as he spoke these words. No one understood their real meaning by the force of the beneficent power of the Lord. These words of the child only amused and made them laugh. Thereupon Sachi asked him to come down to bathe. But the boy refused to descend from his seat, although Sachi urged him to make haste lest father might come to know. I will never come down, said the Lord, if you do not allow me to read. The people, who had collected to the spot, now took the side of the Lord. They found fault with the mother for having stopped the studies of the child. All people are most careful to make their children learn to read and write. It is a rare good fortune when a child himself wants to read. There could be no greater enemy than a person who had advised her to stop the studies of the boy in order to keep him at home and make a dunce of him. The child was not at all to blame in this matter. They also implored Nimai to come down, telling him to go on doing all sorts of mischiefs if he was not allowed to read from that very day. The boy, however, still lingered where he was and went on laughing from his seat on the top of the pile of the refuse cooking pots. Those who saw it were fascinated, and the joy of those persons of good deeds knew no bounds. Till at last the mother herself went up to the child and fetched him with her own hands. The Lord now came away, laughing all the time, like a blue opal shooting its sparkling light in all directions. Thus did the Lord speak out the truth in the mood of Dattatreya. But no one understood it by the interposition of the power of Vishnu. Virtuous Sachi, now helping her son to descend from the pile, made him bathe in order to be cleansed. Misra then made his appearance. Sachi told Misra everything. The child is grieved at heart by not being allowed to read. All present pressed Misra to lift the ban. He is wise and liberal and should be better advised. What Krishna Chandra wills is sure to come to pass. He should, therefore, allow the boy to read, and you need have no anxiety on his account. The boy himself is very willing to read. So Misra should forthwith invest the child with the sacrificial thread on an auspicious day and in a fitting manner. Misra agreed to their proposal. The acts of the child were superhuman and astonished everybody, but no one understood their real significance. Occasionally some, who happened to be exceptionally fortunate, told Misra not to regard his son as mortal child and had advised him to cherish the boy with the greatest care and affection. The Lord thus passed the days and recognized and played in the yard of Sachi after the resumption of his studies, which he did with the greatest delight by command of his father. The diverse restrictions that have been put upon worldly activities by the religious codes, smritis, cannot be understood if they are regarded as intended for the promotion of worldly enjoyment. Those who uphold the rules as rules have found it necessary to secure their observance by promises of enjoyment and threats of misery. This method has been a failure because it did not take a long time for worldly people to find out that those promises and treats were not really to be fulfilled. Neither did they attract the really intelligent class of people, as they promised only worldly rewards which naturally appeared to such persons to be out of place in religion. This is the plight of canon-ridden, smarta, Hinduism. The rules themselves have accordingly lost the effective support of all classes. It does not follow, therefore, that the mode of life enjoined by the Shastras is defective. That mode, if rightly understood, is necessary to be followed for our eternal welfare. The conduct enjoined by the Shastras forms divinely ordained system for all those who desire to qualify for a spiritual life, that is to say, are prepared to subordinate their apparent temporary to the real, permanent and eternal interests. Such a desire is possible only in man and constitutes the special privilege and glory of human life. Material enjoyment does not satisfy men, as it does other animals. The quest of the spiritual is the distinctive, imperative necessity of man. He wants to know why he is here at all. Those who think that it is the principal duty of man to improve the conditions of his present worldly existence try to find out the best way of promoting the scope and quality of mundane activities. The smartest also belong to this class. To this category belong, directly or indirectly, most people of this world. There is, however, a class of people who think that it is our principal, nay, only, duty to serve the absolute, irrespective of apparent worldly loss and gain which are transitory and unreal. The Shastras are accepted for their constant guidance only by this class of people. The smartest only pretend to agree with this class regarding their acceptance of the Shastric method. The smartest, however, really want to serve the false ego, which craves for the transitory enjoyment of this world, by the rules of the scriptures, followed by the former who serve the true ego by dint of their natural attachment to the absolute. The method of the smartest is, therefore, rightly condemned by even consistent worldly people, as being both irrational and ineffective and, in no less unambiguous language, by those who really want to walk in the path of the soul. The restrictive rules of the Shastras are intended for curtailing the opportunity and scope of worldly enjoyment. This is their negative aspect. But these rules really impose obligations of a positive nature. The object of the rules is to direct the mind towards Godhead. These rules are not numerous nor unintelligible. There are, however, rules of various grades. These scriptural dogmas differ from ordinary rules of worldly conduct by their possession of a much more advanced and consistent philosophical nature. In the hands of the smartest, these rules have suffered mechanical elaboration and stultification for being adopted to the worldly purpose. Cooking for oneself is discouraged by the Shastras. The act of cooking meal, as every other act, must be performed only for Godhead. For those who do not want to accept this view, the way is prepared by a number of restrictive observances in regard to cooking done for the appeasement of hunger. These restrictive rules are necessarily superfluous, or rather fulfilled, if cooking is actually done only for Godhead. If we search for the spiritual principle, it is not difficult to understand the rules, although it is not possible for a worldly-minded person to follow them consistently, unless he is really prepared to subordinate the worldly outlook to the spiritual requirement. The ideas of purity and impurity, as applied by the mechanical smartest to lifeless objects, are ridiculous. It is a product of eclipsed cognitive existence due to aversion to Godhead. An object or an act is impure by reference to the attitude towards it of the conscious entity who is responsible for its performance. According to the Shastras, everything is pure which is used in the service of the Absolute by reason of the fully conscious use by the performer of it. An object which according to the eclipsed point of view appears to be objectionable is necessarily rendered wholesome, i.e., is purified by being consciously used in the service of Godhead, whereas the cleanest or most wholesome objects from the worldly standpoint may become necessarily dirty by their unspiritual use. The reference to Godhead is the only cause of purity in its rational sense. The reference of any object to the false ego is the only cause of its impurity. All the scriptures bear unanimous testimony to the truth of this conclusion. The Lord, the moon of the home of Sachi Jagannath, thus enjoyed his childhood sports, infinitely more diverse than are found in this world, of which an infinitesimally small part will be hereafter made known to the world, by way of revelation, by the Akriya. These are the words of Sri Brindavandas Thakur. The words of the Veda reach only the ears of the most fortunate persons. The rest of the world must submit to receive the knowledge from those few. These sports of Sri Sundar were witnessed by all the people. Yet no one recognized the Lord. They all took him to be a mere human child. Similar is the case as regards the words of the Veda. Most people do not really hear them, although they are available for being heard by all. While Sri Gaurachandra was occupied with these pastimes of childhood, apparently oblivious of everything else, the time for his investiture with the sacrificial thread drew nigh. The friends and relatives of the family, duly invited by Misra, met together in the house of Jagannath. The different functions connected with the ceremony were distributed among them, each taking up the part that suited him best. There was great rejoicing. The ladies sang of the excellent qualities of Krishna amidst frequent exclamations of Jai. The dancers kept pace with those who played on the mridanga, the sanai and the banshi. Brahmanas read the Veda and minstrels recited eulogies. Thus joy assumed a visible form in the home of Sachi. All auspicious planetary conjunctions hastened to serve the occasion. In this manner did Sri Gaurasundar put on the holy thread of sacrifice. As the beautiful thread adorned the divine form, it seemed as if Sri Shesha himself encompassed the Lord in the guise of the slender lion. The identical Leela of the Lord that he performed in his appearance as Vaimana, dwarf, was thus reenacted. Sri Gaurasundar manifested the Leela of Sri Vaimana to the delight of all beholders. All saw the fiery radiance of the Brahmana and no longer thought him mortal. As is the practice on such occasions, the Lord, with the Brahmachari's staff in his hand and the wallet for receiving alms across his shoulders, went on a begging tour to the doors of all his devotees. The ladies of every household put as much alms into the wallet of the Lord as their resources enabled them to do, with the utmost satisfaction and with a smiling countenance. The consorts of Brahma and Rudra and the helpmates of all the contemplative sages, munis, assuming the forms of Brahmana matrons, availed themselves of this opportunity of beholding the divine form of Sri Vaimana, and all of them laughingly poured their alms into the wallet of the Lord. The Lord enacted this Leela of Amana for the deliverance of all persons. There is a controversy among worldly sections in regard to the question of the attitude of Sri Caitanya towards the caste system. The Lord himself was born in a Brahmana family and went through all the purificatory ceremonies that are enjoined by the Shastras for the observance of Brahmanas. Are we to suppose from this that the fact is to be interpreted as favoring the retention of the present caste distinctions? It has also been pointed out by the controversialists that as a sannyasin Sri Caitanya resorted to the houses of Brahmanas to beg for his meals. This was apparently the rule, though there were also notable exceptions. Why did Sri Gaurasundar assume the sacrificial thread? Why was he born in a Brahmana family? The answer, of course, is not very difficult to find. What is the harm? The Lord is free to do as he likes. It will be a mistake to suppose that he can be subject to any limitation whatever. The contention that he should have proved the futility of castes and ceremonials by being born outside caste and refusing all ceremonial is itself an attempt of its kind to limit the unlimited. He was not against caste nor in favor of it. He was above the caste. The hereditary Brahmana caste is, however, very different from the scriptural Varna of Brahmanas who know the Brahman, i.e., the greatness of Godhead. The knowledge of the greatness of Godhead is the necessary prerequisite for attaining to the service of God. Anyone who possesses this preliminary knowledge is alone a Brahmana by Varna. The knowledge of the Brahman is not the effect of seminal birth. A person born in a Brahmana family is born again, i.e., becomes Advija, by the ceremony of investiture with the holy thread. He ceases to be a seminal born by his formal accepted submission to receive spiritual enlightenment from the spiritual guide. There are two successive enlightening ceremonies. By the first of these ceremonies, which is called the Apanyana, the seminal born obtains the right of listening to the words of the Veda from the good preceptor. By the subsequent ceremony of initiation, Diksha, he obtains the positive knowledge of the transcendental. These are the two successive stages through which every disloyal soul has to pass on the way to the spiritual service of Godhead. These processes have nothing to do with the hereditary caste or lifeless ceremonial that is sought to be monopolized by any hereditary caste. But Sri Gaur Sundar does not merely uphold the non-seminal scriptural Brahmana ideal and practice in going through the Upanayana ceremony. He was reenacting the activities of Vaimana that possess a very much higher significance. Vaimana begs for alms from his devotees. Godhead is the absolute proprietor of everything. What alms can he beg and what alms can also a soul offer to him? This is the real point at issue in the Vaimana Avatara. Sri Vaimana begged from King Bali sacrifice for that measure of space which is covered by his 3 strides. He encompassed the gross world with 1 stride and the subtle material world by the 2nd stride. The surrender of everything, physical and mental, is not enough to satisfy the Lord, who also begs for the surrender of the soul of the Jiva, who is located in the 3rd region, viz. Vaikuntha, which transcends both the gross and the subtle material worlds. This Leela of the divine dwarf was reenacted by Sri Gaur Sundar for the deliverance of all souls. In other words, the individual soul can be delivered from ignorance regarding himself only by the constant practice of this supreme sacrifice. Godhead chose to be born in a Brahmana family in the Kali age, not to prove that the seminal Brahmana caste is superior to the other seminal castes, neither for the purpose of establishing the superior excellence of seminal birth in a Brahmana family. Sri Krishna had already been born in the family of a cowherd. By the express testimony of the Shastras, the pseudo-Brahmanas of this Kali age are the worst of all classes of the people. Sri Gaur Sundar appeared in a Brahmana family, in fulfillment of the words of the scriptures, for showing his mercy to the degraded Brahmanas. As Sannyasin, Sri Caitanya was a strict observer of the Shastric rules that impose various restrictions on a person belonging to that order, in order to set an example to the degenerate sannyasins of the Kali age. Such conduct does not mean that a sannyasin is, spiritually speaking, superior to a householder, but that both should really follow the word of God, if they want at all to serve him, which alone matters. It would be a blunder to suppose that there could be any excellence in any institution if it ceases to serve God, or that any institution which serves the Lord can be inferior to any other, or that any mundane class difference can apply to the servants of the Lord. Those who are unduly attached to the vanities of seminal birth or the externals of ceremonials and institutions are ever condemned to the delusion that their ungodly worldly preferences are endorsed by God himself. It is not possible to be completely free from the influence of such worldly predilections except by the causeless grace of Sri Gaur Sundar manifested in his activities. The Shastras fix the 8th year from birth as the proper age for investiture with the sacrificial thread. Such investiture admits one to the right of studying the Word of God under the spiritual preceptor. The Lord was now eligible to study under the spiritual preceptor in the company of other students. He threw out a hint that he would like to study under the great grammarian Gangadas Pandit. Sri Jagannath Misra accordingly took his boy to the Chatuspathi Academy of Sri Gangadas Pandit, who received him with the greatest respect. Misra communicated to him his intention of placing in his hands the education of his boy. Gangadas most gladly accepted his new pupil. Gangadas always treated Nimai with special consideration. The extraordinary capacity of the child soon manifested itself. Nimai fully understood whatever his teacher explained only once. He practiced to refute all the explanations of his teacher in order to re-establish them more firmly. The number of students who attended Gangadas Pandit's classes was very large, but there was no one who had the ability to find fault with the explanations of Nimai. On the contrary, Nimai gave constant trouble to all his fellow students by his puzzling questions. He did not spare even the senior students such as Sri Murari Gupta, Sri Kamalakanta, Krishnananda and their associates. They, however, took this favorably, as they regarded the child with special affection. Gangadas Pandit was most highly gratified on noticing the wonderful intelligence of his new pupil and accorded him the honor of the highest position among all his students. The Lord went with the boys to bathe in the Ganges at noon after study. To these bathing places of the Ganges all the students of Nabadwip flocked for their daily bath at midday. The number of students who studied at Nabadwip baffled all calculation. Every single professor taught thousands of students. The pupils of the different teachers quarreled incessantly among themselves. The Lord was on the threshold of budding youth, a period that is naturally full of strange excitement. He disputed freely with all the students. These quarrels of the students possessed certain invariably common features. The ordinary forms of attack were these: your teacher has no brains, and look here, he is the only real teacher whose pupil am I. In this manner, from small beginnings, the pastime soon came to a free fight in right earnest, in which much water was splashed, then sand was thrown, and finally they began to beat one another using clay as the favorite missile. Some were taken in custody by the police on the spot in the name of the king. Some escaped the royal officers across the Ganges after thrashing their adversaries. These performances acquired such violence and dimension that the entire stream of the Ganges was converted by them into a thick mixture of sand and clay. Women who came to fetch water were debarred from filling their pitchers, and Brahmanas and honest citizens from their legitimate baths. Lord Vishwambhar was the most turbulent of all. He made a systematic tour of all the bathing places of the Ganges in this fashion. There was no dearth of scholars at any of the bathing places, ghats. The Lord quarreled with them at every place. Swimming down with the current, the Lord visited all the bathing places, stopping to sport at each of them for some time. The senior boys were at last fain to ask him why he was so extraordinarily quarrelsome. Let the youngsters, they said, ask instead questions for testing one another's knowledge. Only then it could be really known who possessed the correct information of his Briti, Panji and Tikka. The Lord welcomed their suggestion and invited all the urchins to put to himself whatever questions they liked. One of the students protested, saying that he ought not to be too boastful. The Lord only repeated his challenge to be asked any questions. The irate scholar forthwith demanded that the Lord would then and there expound all the formula of verbal root. The Lord, desiring them to listen attentively, at once explained all the sutras in the correct manner. All the students praised his exposition. The Lord said that he would, however, refute all that he had said to them just then, challenging them to defend the very expositions which they had approved. They were struck dumb with astonishment on recognizing that the refutation was also flawless. He told them that he would re-establish the previous expositions and fully satisfied everyone by his explanations to that effect. The senior students were so highly pleased that they enthusiastically clasped him to their bosoms. Then the boys took leave of him for that day with the challenge that he should come prepared to answer their questions again the next day. The Lord of Vaikuntha indulged in these delightful sports in the stream of the Jahnavi, tasting unceasingly the pleasures of learning. It seemed that the all-knowing Brihaspati with all his disciples, indeed, appeared in Nabadwip for participating in these sports. Jahnavi's heart's desire was thus fulfilled at last. She had envied the superior fortune of her sister Sri Yamuna, in whose water Krishnachandra had sported in the Dvapara age. Sri Gaurasundar is verily the purpose tree that fulfills all desires. He sported incessantly in her pure current. On his return home from these sportive performances in the sacred stream of the Ganges, the Lord, the ideal Brahmacharin, duly worshipped Vishnu and, having offered water to holy Tulasi, beloved of Vishnu, sat down to his meal. As soon as meal was finished, the Lord retired to a secluded part of the house with his books. He made his own tipani, annotations, of the sutras of Kalapa Vyakarana and forgot everything else by the sweet taste of books. Misra noted this exemplary conduct of his son and was filled with the highest happiness. He knew nothing but joy night and day. Every day he derived fresh and inexhaustible delight by looking on the face of his child. The joy of Misra cannot be expressed in words. He drank in the beauty of his son with such ardor that he all but merged in the body of his boy with his own frame and all individuality, the consummation so vainly wished by the pseudo-one-iberationists. But as a matter of fact, the joys of merging in the divinity or of any other form of liberation are as nothing to the bliss of Jagannath Misra, who had no occasion to think of those coveted trivialities. The Lord of all the worlds is the son of Jagannath Misra. The eternal Father of the Lord is the revered of all the devotees of the Supreme Lord. Misra experienced all the anxieties of this absorbing and exclusive love for his boy. The marvelous beauty of every limb of Sri Gaurasundar, surpassing the loveliness of the God of love himself, filled Misra with constant anxiety, lest his son attracted the malignant attention of the witches and evil spirits. This fear drove Misra to quit all his claims on the boy and make a complete surrender of him to Krishna. Gaurasundar laughed as he overheard the outpourings of Misra's prayers. Krishna prayed, Misra, thou art the protector of all. Deign to cast thy most auspicious glance even on my son. Danger never comes to the threshold of the person who remembers thy lotus feet. Witches, ghosts and bodiless evil spirits haunt those places of sin that are void of the remembrance of thee. Evil spirits carry their sinister influence to all places where selfish activities and fruitive sacrifices are performed in lieu instead of listening to the account of the doings of Godhead, which destroys the power of all evildoers. Lord, I am thy servant. May thou protect all that belongs to me, as they are thine. May no evil nor danger ever come near my soul. This was the constant prayer of Sri Jagannath Misra. With both hands lifted in prayer, he always supplicated Krishna for this only boon. One day Misra had a most wonderful dream which filled him with the utmost grief in the midst of all this happiness. Rising up in great anxiety, Misra prostrated himself in obeisance, reciting the prayer, Govinda, may my Nimai stay in my house. This is the only boon I pray from thee, O Krishna, that my Nimai may be a householder and stay in the family. Sachi noticed this and being greatly surprised asked Misra the cause of his prayer offered to Krishna with such sudden anguish. Misra narrated to her the story of his vision. I have had a dream, said Misra, as if Nimai had shaved his head. I cannot describe his marvelous attire of sannyasin. He laughed, danced and wept, uttering continuously the name of Krishna. Advatakriya and other devotees, forming a circle round Nimai, chanted the kirtan. Sometimes Nimai seated himself on the throne of Vishnu and, holding up his feet, put them on the heads of all. Four-faced, five-faced, thousand-faced forms sang victory to the son of Sri Sachi. All recited hymns of praise to him from every side with the greatest joy. I was dumb with fear at what I beheld. Then I saw that Nimai went along on his way dancing through each and every town, taking with him crores of people. Lakhs of crores of people ran after Nimai and sang the name of Hari, whose sound rang through the universe. I could hear on all sides only the praises of Nimai, who journeyed to Puri in the company of all those devotees. It is this most strange dream that has made me so anxious, lest the boy leave the family through lack of attachment for things of this world. Sachi Devi did not think that there was any real ground for anxiety, notwithstanding the dream, as the boy was so completely engrossed in his books that the taste of learning had verily become the whole of his duty. The father and mother of the Lord were of a disposition that was utterly unselfish. They had between them many a discussion on the subject by reason of their exclusive love for their son. In this manner Misra passed his days for some time longer, and, thereafter, he withdrew his eternally pure form from the view of this world. The Lord wept much at the departure of Misra, like Sri Ramachandra on the disappearance of Dasaratha. The attraction of Sri Gaurasundar is irresistible. The life of his mother was preserved thereby. It is a most affecting topic, and Thakur Brindavandas, our authority, stops abruptly and confesses his inability to linger on the pathetic subject. The only point that remains to be noticed in this connection is the statement that the form of Sri Jagannath Misra is described as eternally pure, and also that he withdrew himself from the view of the people of this world and did not die. In fact, the soul is also our only real body. The physical case is a temporary accretion as a corrective contrivance for curing our godlessness. But Sri Jagannath Misra, the father of Sri Gaurasundar, is eternally pure plenary divine essence and has no physical body, as there can be no godlessness in his case. What seemed to godless people as his physical body was really his eternal all-holy spiritual form. The Father of Godhead, who is ever identical with his body, manifested himself in this world of matter, in obedience to the will of Godhead and for the purpose of participating in the divine activities when the latter appear in this world. He remained visible in this world as long as his part was being played. He ceased to be visible after this function was fulfilled. His manifestation in this world was brought about by the spiritual power of Godhead and was a holy spiritual affair, unlike the birth of sinful jivas, which is brought about by the deluding power of God and is really transitory and insubstantial. Those who suppose that there is no difference between this mortal body and the apparently similar bodies of the eternal devotees of Godhead when they manifest their appearance in this world, ignore thereby the eternal and categorical distinction between matter and spirit. To the material eye of the conditioned soul, the body of a Vaishnava, when by the grace of Godhead he becomes visible to him, may appear to be material, just as to a jaundiced eye everything seems to be yellow. The defective vision of the sinner is, however, solely responsible for this delusion. The deluded soul is not privileged to have the sight of the real form of the Vaishnava. The birth, death and activities of the Vaishnava, although they have an external resemblance to those of conditioned souls, are categorically different from the latter. It is only the spiritual eye, the eve of the pure soul, which can actually see this difference. The sorrow of Sri Gaurasundar at the disappearance of Misra was not also a delusion. It would, however, be a profane delusion if we suppose that he felt sorry for the death of his father like ordinary people of this world. To him Jagannath Misra can never die, nor can Misra ever disappear from the view of his son. Therefore, neither of these can be the cause of the sorrow of Sri Gaur Sundar. Sri Jagannath Misra's anxiety on account of his son, lest he became a sannyasin, and Sri Gaur Sundar's sorrow at the apparent disappearance of Sri Jagannath Misra, are instances of divine activities which are absolutely free from all taint of unwholesomeness, unlike the apparently similar activities of fettered souls which are altogether unwholesome. There is separation, pang of separation and anxiety at the prospect of separation, also in the transcendental realm of the spirit. The conditions for this are supplied there by the spiritual power of the divinity and are, therefore, also spiritual, that is, absolutely free from all unwholesomeness. This is inconceivable to the fallen jivas but is the only reality obscured to the view of the latter by the joys and sorrows of the physical body and the materialized mind. In the realm of the absolute, there is no break of existence but only the semblance of it, in order to heighten, diversify and enrich the positive joy of eternal existence. In regard to the things of this world the case is otherwise, and it is the greatest of mercies that this is so. Had it been otherwise, it would have only perpetuated the barren experience of mundane activities which are the trivial and unacceptable distortions of the facts of the eternal existence. The Absolute exists by himself. This physical world has not only a relative but also superfluous, unwholesome and altogether subordinate existence. It is so, because everything is real in Godhead, although it is often both unnecessary and impossible for the individual soul to understand it, except in so far as it is actually divulged to his serving disposition by the mercy of the Supreme Lord. Chapter VE, Early Youth and Student Life. The Lord still chose to remain self-concealed, passing his days mostly in the company of his mother. Sri Sachi Devi, in lieu of his father, now devoted herself exclusively to the service of the boy. If she did not see her son for the fraction of an hour, the power of sight left her eyes, and she would lose all self-consciousness. The Lord also displayed constantly his love for his mother and consoled her with encouraging words. He bade her have no anxiety since he himself belonged to her, and as he would supply all her wants and fetch for her, with ease, things that were obtainable with great difficulty by Brahma and Siva. As she gazed on the beautiful face of the child, Sachi Devi lost the memory of her bodily existence, not to speak of her sorrows. The Lord himself, by the mere remembrance of whom all wants are fulfilled, was ever present to her in the form of her own son. How could, therefore, any bodily sorrows persist in her? The Lord made his mother the very soul of joy. There is no desire for selfish enjoyment in the realm of the Absolute, Vaikuntha. The servants of Godhead, who are the denizens of that happy realm, being always in the presence of the Lord by reason of their entire dependence on him, are altogether forgetful of their own selves. The inhabitants of this mundane world, due to their forgetfulness of Krishna, put their reliance on their own bodies, and are accordingly liable to cherish all those concerns that minister to its transitory pleasures. It is in this manner that fallen jivas by their own contrivance become subjected to the various miseries of this mundane world. There was no room for selfish grief in the pure heart of Sachi, which was wholly occupied with love for Godhead. The eternal spiritual impulse of maternal affection for the divine child alone possesses the quality of causing complete forgetfulness of one's own body. A worldly mother loves her son for her own selfish pleasure. This is also the case with the so-called love of a mundane wife for her husband. All such pretended attachments are impure by reason of their intrinsic selfishness, which completely captures the mind the moment it is turned towards the objects of this world. The Lord Godhead, King of Vaikuntha, thus passed his days in Nabadwip in the form of a Brahmana boy, in the ecstatic bliss of enjoying the moods of his own mind known only to himself. In the home at Nabadwip the uttermost poverty prevailed. The Lord's commands were ever worthy of the Lord Paramount of the highest gods. He did not care to know whether there was anything in the house. If whatever he demanded was not instantly supplied, it produced the most terrible consequences. He would immediately smash up everything, the house, doors and windows, and, in fact, nothing escaped the fury of his anger. He was absolutely heedless of the damage done by himself to his own property. But despite all mischief that was thus done continuously, Sachi Devi was always assiduous in supplying, with all care, whatever he asked for, by reason of her unmixed affection for her son. On a certain day, as the Lord was about to go out for his bath in the Ganges, he asked his mother for oil and myrobalan, and also for choice garlands of flowers and odoriferous sandal paste, as he wished to worship the holy Ganges with the said offerings after his bath. The mother implored him to wait for a very short time to enable her to procure the garlands. No sooner did Sri Gaur-Sundar catch her words that she was to bring the garlands from elsewhere, he became terrible as Rudra, the god of destruction, in his sudden anger. With the words, "Would you then, indeed, go out for the garlands now?" he entered his apartment raging furiously. Then first of all he vented his wrath on the earthen pots in which the holy water from the Ganges was stored, and broke all of them. By the stroke of a big stick, he next broke deliberately all those pots which contained oil, ghee and salt. He then smashed all the pots, big and small, that happened to be in the room. Oil, ghee, milk, rice, cotton, paddy, salt, cakes of puddles, mudja, were mixed up together on the floor of the room. He then snatched away all the nets of rope for hanging up articles and tore them to shreds. All clothing that he found in the house shared the same fate. When there remained no article to break, the Lord's anger turned against the house itself. He plied the big stick with both hands on the house, no one venturing to utter a word of protest. Having smashed the doors and windows, he turned to the trees and treated them in the same fashion. In that mad fit of anger there was no disposition to forgive. When there remained no article to break, his stick showered blows on the very earth itself. All this while Sachi remained in a state of great fear, almost hiding herself behind a remote corner of the house. The Lord, the establisher of religion himself, the eternal religion, did not lift his hands against his mother. Although he was still fully disposed to manifest the fury of his wrath which knew no bounds, yet he did not go against his mother, nor try to hurt her. Having smashed all things, the Lord came out into the yard and rolled on the bare ground with an angry mind. His golden body became enveloped in sand and was, it is hardly meet to divulge, a wondrous, beautiful sight. After thus rolling frantically on the ground for some time, the Lord became motionless. As he lay in this quiet posture, the Lord glanced at the power that lulls him to slumber, Yoga Maya, and the Lord of Vaikuntha did enjoy his sleep on the bosom of the earth. The Lord, whose resting place is the all-holy form of Sri Anantadeva, whose lotus feet are ever tended by Lakshmi herself, the object of quest of the four Vedas, slept in this fashion in the yard of Sachi. The Lord, in the vesicle of whose hair there lies afloat an infinitude of worlds, whose servants have power to create, maintain and destroy, whose qualities Brahma, Siva and their piercing with rapture, the self-same Supreme Lord himself thus reposed in a deep slumber in the yard of Sachi. The Supreme Lord slept on in the bliss of his own consciousness. The sight made the gods laugh and cry. After some time had passed, Sri Sachi Devi, having procured the garlands and made ready all requisites for the worship of the Ganges, laying her hand softly on the body of her son, tried to awaken him by gently wiping the dust from his person. "Wake up, my darling," said she. "See, here are the garlands. Take them for worshipping the Ganges even as thou likest. It is well and good that thou hast smashed all things of the house. Let it take away thy sorrows." Roused by these words of his mother, Sri Gaur-Sundar, feeling ashamed at heart, set off for his bath without more ado. After the Lord had left, Sachi made all the rooms clean and prepared to cook his meal. Sachi did not feel the least sorrow in her mind, although the Lord habitually did such intolerable mischief. Sachi put up with all the waywardness of Sri Gaur-Sundar in the same manner that Sri Yasoda bore the restless turn for mischief of Sri Krishna in the cowherd settlement. I have no power to record all the wayward acts of the Lord. But Sachi bore up with all those with unruffled patience of body, speech and mind, like Mother Earth herself. The playful Lord returned home after bath and, having worshipped Vishnu and offered water to Tulasi, beloved of Vishnu, sat down to his meal. After meal the Lord appeared to be satisfied. He then performed a kaman and began chewing betel. His mother then spoke gently. "For what purpose, darling, didst thou do all this damage? The house, doors, windows, all articles of the household are thine. All the loss is thine. It does not affect me. Even now thou wilt be going off for thy study. There is nothing in the house wherewith to buy anything. What wilt thou eat tomorrow?" Hearing these words of the mother the Lord laughed. "Krishna," said he, "nourishes. He will maintain." With this the Lord of the goddess of learning, book in hand, strolled off to his studies. A certain interval of time was passed in the joy of study, after which the Lord came to the bank of the Ganges in the evening. Having stayed there a while, the Lord returned home. He then called his mother and taking her aside gave her 2 tulas of pure gold. "Mother," said he, "Krishna has given this stuff. by changing it meet all necessary expenses. He then retired to bed. Sachi was filled with great astonishment. Whence could he procure this gold? He had been doing it pretty frequently of late. In fact, whenever there was any want of money, he obtained gold in this manner. Was it likely to bode any danger? Did he borrow or know some magical art? Whence, how, whose gold was thus brought? These anxieties troubled the mind of Sachi, which was untainted with greed in any form, being perfectly generous. She was also afraid of getting a change for such gold time and again. She always instructed the person whom she entrusted the changing of it to do so after he had shown it to a sufficient number of discreet people. Such conduct in any other boy as old as Sri Gorsundar, if allowed free scope by his doting mother, would hardly appeal to the judgment of many persons as auguring any good for the future of the child. They would, at any rate, fail to find any decent apology for such excessive and unbounded material leniency. An unruly child is required to be handled, indeed, with tact but also with real firmness if he is to be prevented from getting out of hand. The conduct of Sri Sachi Devi and of Sri Yasoda does not fulfill this ideal of motherhood. Many a child, with an abundance of the animal spirit, have been altogether spoiled by the doting policy of unrestrained motherly indulgence. It should be very difficult, nay almost impossible, for dutiful worldly mothers to appreciate the maternal conduct of Sri Sachi Devi. Vaishnavism has been charged with the attempt to idolize sentimentalism of the most exaggerated type. Even if for the sake of argument sentimentalism be allowed to possess any outstanding value, it should still be necessary to keep it within natural bounds. The Vaishnava is apparently supposed to know no such limits. He seems to be ready to make a display of his feelings and to evince a great pleasure in carrying his heart on his sleeves. The practical and cognitive sides of one's nature do not thus appear to receive their due recognition in the conduct that is extolled by the Vaishnavas as ideal, which displays an apparently sickening exuberance of the most effusive sentimentalism. This is doubly inexplicable as coming from persons who deprecate a leavened sensuousness. I think it would not be fair to my readers if I do not avail myself of the first opportunity of trying to clear up misapprehensions that are apt to be entertained even by unprejudiced persons in regard to this feature of Vaishnavism. Most worldly people identify religion with morality. Ordinary morality aims at serving the jiva by ensuring for his mundane body and mind an ever-increasing fund of sensuous enjoyment. A child is subjected to rules of discipline in order to aid the realization of the above object. Waywardness has to be checked, lest it becomes a habit which may stand in the way of the worldly well-being of the child when he grows up. Morality would not be valued and is ignored on principle whenever it is actually opposed to the worldly interest. The instinct which seems to claim for it an absolute value is apt to be stifled by the voice of the worldly reason, which secures its victory by pointing to the uncertain, transitory, enjoyable consequences of any absolute rule of practice. There are also those who have tried to prove that the moral instinct itself is the product of those untoward material circumstances which it is set up to correct. The absolute is thus altogether ruled out, and the purely temporary object is substituted in his place, a procedure which has given to the empiric science of ethical conduct its so-called practical and definitely worldly character. The rule of expediency has been openly adopted as the final principle of rational human conduct, the object being the amelioration of worldly wants and the consequent extension of worldly happiness. It is taken for granted that there is nothing beyond our present pleasures of this world that need be considered as really valuable. This scheme undoubtedly possesses the qualities of clearness and apparent feasibility. It is admittedly incomplete, as it professes to be ignorant of many things. But if it be identified with religion, it becomes necessary to suppose that there is a dead void beyond the activities of this world, as they are practiced by the majority of us. This would be inconsistent with the ideal ordinarily professed to be cherished by the empiric moralists. But it may be urged that, even if morality is not wholly identifiable with religion, it should not, therefore, be also ignored by the latter. If it be pleaded that morality, in the above sense, forms an integral part of religion, this would also be illogical. Such proposition really begs the question to be proved. The whole scheme of morality is based on a definite and unwarrantably narrow view of life. Is it logical to insist that such narrowness should be allowed to remain intact even after the view of life has been infinitely widened? All we can insist on is that morality must be incorporated in religion insofar as its retention may not defeat the purpose of religion. We cannot insist that it must not be enlarged, while admitting that expansion is not mere destruction or involving the loss of any wholesome interest. It is not asserted that no evil consequences, in the worldly sense, can result from the licensed extreme waywardness of an earthly child due to fond indulgence shown to such a child by a doting earthly mother. A man of this world will be punished if he breaks any law of this world. One who is in quest of worldly pleasures will not gain them by neglecting to follow the course apparently laid down by God Himself for their attainment. A wayward child, who merely refuses to submit to the laws of physical nature, will incur and deserve the punishment that is attached to such conduct by such law. On the other hand, one who does not desire to enjoy material pleasures is also punished as he chooses to go against the laws of nature. It is not possible for any possessor of the physical body and limited mind to be immune from the operation of the laws of physical nature. But Sri Gaur Sundar and Sri Sachi Devi, although they may appear to us to be like the people of this world, really belong to the transcendental sphere. They act in accordance with the innate freedom of that higher realm. It would be unwise, therefore, for us, while we are situated in this world, to try to imitate their conduct or to condemn it for the mere reason that it does not correspond to the ideal of mortals. They are beings of another world, endowed with other and higher natures, who have chosen to appear in our midst, independently of the laws of this world. Therefore, what we have to do is to try to learn about that other world from what they say and do. That would be the proper and logical attitude on our part. We must by no means try to imitate them. We shall be punished by the laws of this world, if we try to do so. In that transcendental world, waywardness need not be checked, as no evil consequences are produced, everything being perfectly pure and harmonical and incapable of being curtailed by hostile conflict with anything else. Our souls in their normal state are the denizens of that happy realm. We have been hurled into this nether world by our disinclination to avail ourselves the freedom of that world. We can regain our natural state of purity and unalloyed bliss if only we agree to accept the higher law. Godhead and His beloved ones come down into this world to remind us of our true native land and enlighten us regarding the cause of our exile therefrom. The words of the people of the spiritual realm are identical with their conduct. Both mean the same thing. Godhead and His beloved ones come down into this world to tell fallen jivas the tidings of Vaikuntha, and, lest they misunderstand their words by supposing them to refer to the things and conditions of this world, Godhead makes all His activities of Vaikuntha visible to mortal eyes. Even a mortal can see them with the eye of faith, that is to say, if he is disposed to love and obey Godhead, which is the only law of the spiritual realm. On the contrary, if we seek to please ourselves, those very visible divine activities represent only their deluding, i.e., seemingly worldly, face to us. Common misapprehensions in regard to Vaishnavism owe their origin mainly to that natural aversion to Godhead which is the sedulously cultivated second nature of all fallen jivas, and partly to the misleading activities of the pseudo-Vaishnavas who, in the state of sin, imitate, without caring to understand its real significance, the external conduct of the true devotees of Godhead. The conduct of the true devotees of Krishna is always perfect and combines in itself, without necessitating the least curtailment, the principles of knowing, willing and feeling in the fullest harmonious measure. To us who are wholly sensuous, the perfectly pure activities of God necessarily appear as being also wholly sensuous. They are, however, absolutely pure and without any mundane defect. But this can be fully realized only by the soul who is himself free from all earthly taint. The activities of Godhead and His devotees rebound to our lasting good, if they are approached with a serving disposition as manifestations of the divinity by the method of listening to the account of them from the lips of the true devotees of Godhead. By this method and this method alone we, fallen jivas, may be enabled to understand their real meaning and thereby learn to obey Krishna. If they are approached for any other purpose, they only show their deluding face to us. The pseudo-Vaishnavas are as much more deluded than even those who are openly and frankly skeptical. Both are equally attached to the pleasures of this world. But the former further try to extend the scope of their sensuous enjoying propensities also towards spiritual matters. They seek to procure sensuous pleasure by aping deliberately the performances of the sadhus with fatal consequences both for themselves and their followers. The skeptics are right in holding the pseudo-religionists to be worse than themselves. But they certainly carry their aversion to undue lengths by supposing that the true worship of Godhead described in the scriptures is itself non-existent or harmful. This is the real punishment of such worldly skepticism. The Supreme Lord, who could have easily disarmed the opposition of all the people, even the most skeptical, by the display of his divine powers, chose to remain in obscurity, and went on with his pastimes in this manner at Nabadwap. At this period he never left off his books for a single moment. He was most assiduous in his studies in the company of the other students, among whom he could be easily distinguished by his extraordinarily beautiful appearance. He looked as if the god of love himself had become manifest on this earth. His appearance of this period is thus described by Thakur Brindavandas. The beautiful tilaka mark, pointing in an upward direction, adorned his forehead. The profusion of curly hair that graced his head captivated the minds of all beholders. The sacrificial thread was placed gracefully across his shoulder. He was the living form of the fiery Brahmana spirit. His cheerful and beautiful face was always covered with smiles. His teeth were perfectly pure. The pair of his lotus eyes were inexpressibly wonderful. His cloth, worn with a triple kachcha, was a thing of most marvelous beauty. Whoever beheld him gazed on his beauty and found it impossible to take away their eyes from him. There was no one who did not pay him the tribute of his unstinted praise. The wonderful manner of his expositions filled his teacher with unbounded joy. His teacher, leading him by his own hands, made him occupy the highest seat among all his pupils. The teacher said, "My dear, read attentively. I strongly declare that thou shalt be the greatest of teachers." The Lord replied, "Is the position of the greatest of teachers difficult to be attained by one who has your blessing?" No student could answer the questions of the Lord. He himself settled the interpretation of the sutras and then refuted his own explanations. And when no one was able to establish the right meaning, the Lord explained the text in the proper manner. The Lord had no other thoughts except the Shastras, whether at his bath, at his meal, or in his walks. The Lord thus came to be looked up to as almost their teacher by the pupils of Pandit Gangadas. Early in the morning, after performing the Sandhya ceremony, the Lord went out to study in the company of all his students. He then took his seat at the assembly hall of Gangadas Pandit and was constantly engaged in polemical discussions in opposing or supporting propositions that might be advanced. The Lord always deprecated those students who did not avail themselves of his teaching, mercilessly using every opportunity to expose their ignorance. After study with Pandit Gangadas, the Lord expounded the texts to the pupils. The leading students, each with his group of junior followers, sat round the Lord in different rows, all with the solitary exception of Murari Gupta, who alone refused to be coached by the Lord, for which reason the Lord was never tired of exposing his defect. While explaining lessons to the students, the Lord sat in the center wearing his cloth in the style of Yogapada and in the posture of the seated warrior, Virasana. The upward tilaka mark of sandal paste adorned his forehead. The glow of the rows of his charming teeth put to shame the luster of pearls. The Lord was in his 16th year, in the bloom of budding youth. His beauty enchanted the god of love himself. He displayed a scholarship that was deemed superior to that of the celestial sage. He ridiculed all who did not study under him. He was very proud of his learning and would challenge everybody to refute his conclusions. He often declared that those who did not know how to combine two words by the process of sandhi, compounding, dared to set up as expounders of the texts in order to console themselves with the idle vanity that they could really understand the books by their unaided intelligence. Many persons unfortunately turned out fools by reason of such vanity, which prevented them from learning from their betters. This was intended for Murari Gupta, who would remain silent and obdurate even under this severe castigation. But the Lord always loved to poke his servant, whose sight filled him with joy. The Lord would ask Murari, who belonged to the Vaidya caste, to betake himself to his legitimate trade of healing sick persons, by giving up study. The Vyakarana Shastra was difficult in the extreme. There was no prescription in it for phlegm, bile, or indigestion. What will you understand of it by your assiduous cogitations? Better go back home and treat your patients. Murari, though of a fighting temperament, was prevented from being angry by looking at Vishwambhar, and only replied, "What a great personage. You poke everybody and brag a good deal. You are author of Sutra, Briti, Panji, Tika, etc. But did you ever fail to get a reply to your questions from me? Without asking any questions you say, 'What dost thou know?' You are Brahmana and worthy of my reverence. What can I say?" The Lord said, "Explain then what you have read today." As Gupta began to construe, the Lord began to refute. Gupta explained in one sense, the Lord expounded in another. The master and the servant were equally matched, and neither could score a decisive victory. Gupta was most profoundly learned by the power of the Lord. The Lord was delighted by hearing his explanations. Being pleased, the Lord touched his body with his lotus hand, and forthwith the whole frame of Murari was thrilled with joy. The thought flashed in the heart of Murari Gupta, this person is never a man of this earth. Such scholarship is also impossible in man. By the touch of his hand one's body becomes full of transcendental bliss. There is no humiliation to study under him. In the whole of Nabadwip there is not another who possesses such excellent understanding. The worthy Gupta, being highly pleased, said, I say, Vishwambhar, I agree to study under thee. Godhead and his devotee ever engage in such blissful pastimes. They went off to bathe in the Ganges after this learned encounter, in the company of all the students. Godhead himself tasted the delights of study in this manner, as student. These details have been handed down by the associates of Sri Caitanya regarding his student career. Study divorced from religion is not only considered nowadays to be useful, but also as a necessity. Religion, which appeals to authority, is supposed to be the antipode of that freedom of thought which is considered necessary for really successful pursuit of knowledge. Knowledge is never pursued for its own sake. In gathering knowledge we suppose to make use of a faculty which the great God has mercifully bestowed upon us for our physical and mental improvement. This may also be supposed to be corroborated by the conduct of Naimaya's student. He also devoted himself wholeheartedly to the acquisition of secular knowledge, e.g., grammar, which is the science of language. He rebelled against his parents when he was a mere child, when they stopped his secular studies. He was the terror of all the students for his acumen in purely secular controversy. Does all this look like tame submission on his own part to authority by relegation of freedom of thought? It is true he led the life of the ideal Brahmacharin and daily worshipped Vishnu and honored the Tulasi and Mahaprasada. But those did not prevent him from the undiluted pursuit of purely secular studies. His method as well as object as student may thus appear to be identical in practice with those of modern pedagogics. Why did he find fault with everybody and specially the teachers? He boasted that no one could meet his objections, nor refute his interpretation. The evident implication is that according to him 11 those teachers were wandering in a maze of errors. Even as student he wanted all persons, including the professors themselves, to learn from him, and not to depend on themselves. We have the recorded testimony of the Vaishnavas of that period that the learned professors were no less deeply engrossed than others in the pursuit of worldly objects. This plan was also carried into their academies, in which, in place of the pursuit of truth, was substituted the dissociated study of different secular subjects, such anarchy being mistaken for real freedom. The result was the absolute want of all real scholarship and the utter disregard of the only proper object of all studies. The conclusions of such spurious scholarship only confirmed the reign of ignorance. Nimai had no respect at all for this system or its products. European psychologists have tried to establish the rationale of the exclusive pursuit of isolated branches of knowledge by their denial of the very existence of a soul who is located beyond the jurisdiction of the mind. They make the limited mind identical with the soul. They want to add to the defective equipments of the mind. This they call spiritual effort, as in their opinion the mind is identical with the soul. The mind, thus furnished with knowledge, is regarded as being thereby rendered more capable of successfully performing the various duties of this life. One's duties are also supposed to be properly performed, if the worldly consequences of one's acts are duly considered and provided for, the object again being to obtain the maximum pleasant results in the worldly sense. The mind, which lives, moves and has its being in this world, is to be enabled to do all this in such manner that it may not only fall foul of the laws of nature, but may avail itself of them for overcoming the unpleasant possibilities represented by those very laws. The policy may properly be described as the application of the principle of divide and rule to nature. This mastery over, or enjoyment of, physical nature, according to fashionable philosophy, is the goal of spiritual progress. The Pandits of Nabadwip of the time of Sri Caitanya were famous for their learning and also for their aversion to Krishna. They had no idea of obeying authority, that is to say, of serving anybody excepting themselves. The means, whereby this result was to be achieved, might have been more defective than nowadays, as was to be expected in that comparatively backward age. Their exclusive pursuit of grammar, logic and such abstract subjects was the cause of their lack of worldly prosperity, as was also the case in other countries in the medieval period. The pursuit of scientific knowledge by the methods of observation and induction has ensured the wonderful material progress of the present day. The agreement between empiric method and object, which was then lacking, has been effected with greater success by the free efforts of the human mind during the last 4 centuries. Might not Sri Chaitanya's objection to the comparatively barren pursuits of the Pandits of his day have been due to his perception of this defeat in the systems of the studies of his time? Let us take a hypothetical case. Let us suppose that we possessed a vision that enabled us to find out the details of the operation of all the laws of nature. What use would we then make of this knowledge? Would we try to submit to those laws or control them by making them oppose one another? Why should we consider it our duty to be able to do either? In what way does it profit us? It would be excellent amusement to be able to manipulate nature in the way we like. But why do we at all desire to do it? Would we be really satisfied by the temporary seeming possession of this power? It would not enable us to eliminate our bodily and mental sufferings. It would only modify them. But such modification, in itself, would also be an equally intolerable suffering, if we are thereby doomed to live perpetually under limiting conditions of that sort. So we arrive at no satisfying goal of our efforts by the method of merely modifying the opportunities of material enjoyment, mental or physical, which is the professed and exclusive object of the empiric scientists. Did Sri Chaitanya only want us to follow this so-called advanced scientific method and object? Did he want us to be more engrossed in material pursuits? The Pandits of that time had made great progress in the sciences of abstract logic and grammar. It would be difficult even at the present day to suggest any considerable improvement of the knowledge they then possessed of those subjects. Modern science has put its seal of approval on the abstruse speculations in those fields of the ancients, although it has supplemented them by the methods of more careful observation of phenomena on which all empiric knowledge is supposed to be based. The science of Indian grammar is apparently one of the greatest triumphs of inductive generalization from observed phenomena. Sri Chaitanya seems to have objected neither to the empiric method nor to the subject of investigation. His objection applied to the interpretation. Interpretation means the establishment of the connection of a subject with the self. The interpretations of Nimai were true. The interpretations of everybody else were fallacious. In the absence of the right interpretation, all so-called knowledge remains external to the self and is liable to be used in a way that is harmful to the self. The right interpretation of phenomena can be known by the mercy of Godhead and learnt only by submission to Him. Without this allegiance to the Supreme Lord, all so-called knowledge becomes only a dangerous delusion, although we, in the insubmissive state, are not properly aware of this. We shall presently learn more regarding this matter when we consider the activities of Nimai as professor of the real science of grammar. Chapter X, Professor Life and Marriage. Nimai now set up his own academy in the hall, mandap, of the family temple of the goddess Chandi, which formed part of the frontal division of the residence of Mukunda Sanya, a person of great good fortune and an opulent citizen of Nabadwip. The whole family of Mukunda Sanya was devoted to the Lord. The spacious Chandi Mandap accommodated a very large number of students. The Lord organized the body of his students into a school and taught them at this place. Thus was formed the academy under Sri Gauranga as professor for the pursuit of learning. The variety of Nimai Pundit's interpretations and refutations knew no limit. In these erudite performances the professors of Nabadwip were a standing subject of his regrets. He used to say that in the Iron Age those who were ignorant of the elementary process of joining together two syllables, sandhi, which forms the opening chapter of the science of language, passed themselves off as professors of the Shastras. I challenge them to expose my malinterpretations. I would admit they deserve their high-sounding designations of Bhatta and Misra if they can point out any flaws in my interpretations. The learned performances of all the professors were declared to be only tissues of elaborate falsehoods which prevented them from realizing the necessity of learning about the truth by submission to feet of truth himself. If those learned men had possessed the requisite degree of sincerity and clearness of thinking, they would have been inquisitive to know what he had to tell them. But they were perfectly content with their ephemeral and misleading speculations and did not feel the least inclination even to give a hearing to their challenger. So it is not the manipulation of so-called material advantages by the pursuit of the different branches of empiric study that can rescue empiric learning from the charge of mischievous worthlessness. The relation of empiric learning itself to the truth and to oneself must be grasped if it is to be of any real use to a person. The absence of this knowledge vitiated the whole thing ab initio. It is owing to this fundamental defect that such studies only added to the delusions of obstinately ignorant persons. If those studies had been conceived and carried out in the proper spirit, they would have certainly led them to the truth. But the real object and method of study are hidden from the view of deliberately ignorant persons, and the knowledge of them can be had only from those who know about him by unconditional submission at his holy feet. The professors of Nabadwap did not know this, and their interminable labors accordingly only served to multiply their delusions and falsehoods, which led their pupils and themselves farther away from the truth, who is admittedly the only goal of all learning. Sri Sachi Devi now thought of finding a suitable bride for her youthful son. There lived at Nabadwap a most worthy Brahmana of the name of Sri Balabhakrya, who managed his household in the spirit of King Janaka of yore. He had a daughter whose name was Lakshmi, and who was the same as Sri Lakshmi Devi of Vaikuntha. The Brahmana constantly thought of a suitable husband for his daughter. Lakshmi was well known to Sri Sachi Devi and Nimai himself. Kavira Goswami has recorded the following incident of the boyhood of Nimai in his work Sri Caitanya Charitamrita. In his boyhood, Nimai was extremely turbulent and a source of trouble to everybody. He took particular delight in teasing the people while they were in the act of bathing in the Ganges. The details of these occurrences, as described by Thakur Brindavandas, have already been reproduced. Nimai, as we saw, did not spare even the girls from his turbulent attentions. One day, as the daughter of Balabhakrya was preparing to worship the gods after her bath in the Ganges, the Lord saw her and felt an inclination to make her acquaintance. Lakshmi also was delighted to see the Lord. The love between Lakshmi and the Supreme Lord is eternal. It now manifested itself under the guise of childish behavior. They expressed their mutual joy under pretense of worshipping the gods. The Lord said to her, "Worship me. I am the great Lord, Maheshwara. By worshipping me you will get such husband as you wish to have." Lakshmi accordingly placed on his body flowers sprinkled with the sandal paste and did reverence by putting on him garlands made of the malika flower. The Lord began to laugh on receiving her devotion and accepted the desire of her heart by reciting the shloka of the Bhagavatam spoken by Sri Krishna to the milkmaids. "Loyal maidens, I have become aware of the meaning of your worship, which has, indeed, given me very great pleasure. Your hopes are worthy of fulfillment." The Lord also wished to perform the duties enjoined by the Shastras on a householder, as he was now settled in the household life. The spiritual duties of a householder cannot be discharged properly without cooperation of a helping female partner. The Lord accordingly conceived the desire of entering the state of matrimony. In the words of the Smriti, the house itself is not called the household. The mistress is the real household. Being united to her by marriage, a person attains the four coveted objects of life, viz., the proper performance of his duties, necessaries, objects of desire and liberation. While he was in this mood, the Lord accidentally came across the daughter of Balabhakrya on her way to the Ganges. He was then returning home from his studies. The sight kindled, in the hearts of both, the love that already existed there in its perfection. The Lord smiled as he met his own Lakshmi. Sri Lakshmi Devi also greeted in her mind the twin lotus feet of the Lord before they went back to their respective homes. Who, asks Thakur Brindavandas, can understand the pastimes of Sri Gaur-Sundar? The institution of marriage, as every other institution, misses its proper object if it does not serve the Supreme Lord. The prospect of carnal enjoyment which the institution seems, to the ungodly, to offer, is the snare that requires to be most carefully avoided. The union of Lakshmi and Narayana is the source of all manifest and non-manifest existence. Sri Narayana is the only Lord of all created things. He creates through the medium of Sri Lakshmi Devi. This eternal marriage of Sri Lakshmi Narayana is hidden from the view of mortals by the shadow of the desire for carnal enjoyment falling across their vision. The Shastric institution of marriage is intended to reclaim bound jivas from the deadly slough of carnality. If they follow the life enjoined by the Shastras for the married state, they will thereby be enabled to progress towards freedom from the fascination of carnality. The bound jiva, misled by his sensuous hankering and preferring his own selfish enjoyment to the constant and eternal service of his Lord, is, of course, free to speculate about the advantages and disadvantages of the institution of marriage from the purely secular point of view. But such speculative attitude, however carefully one may try to guard oneself against the natural and inevitable consequences of carnality, will only forge a stronger chain to bind him to an unnatural and miserable existence. The external gloss supplied by godless speculation only aggravates the real mischief by hiding the unspirituality of all empiric conceptions of one's duty. The Greek opinion that the gods are opposed to the happiness of man through malice is true in this sense. The gods always try to prevent the sensuous happiness of man. This is most beneficial in its possible results for humanity. The so-called happiness for which man hankers is but gilded misery, because the soul in the conditioned state understands and cares only for the things of this world. This is the disease to which all people of this world are subject. This malady is increased if the cause of it is strengthened. By increased hankering for new opportunities of material enjoyment, the cause of the malady is not likely to be removed. The quest of happiness itself is not unnatural. But if we want to be happy, we must first of all try to understand what can make us truly happy. Desire for sensuous enjoyment is the cause of unhappiness. Abstinence from such enjoyment also will not do, as it leads to a worse form of misery. Desire to serve the Lord for the sake of service can alone make us happy. Every activity can give us happiness to the extent that it is really service of Godhead, or, in other words, to the extent that it tends to absolute submission to Him. The marriage of Lakshmi and Narayana does not belong to the category of the carnal marriage of sensuous jivas. The marriage of the fettered jivas becomes successful, according to the Shastras, only if it succeeds in reclaiming them from the bondage of carnality. When this result is actually produced by faithfully following the injunctions of the Shastras, there should necessarily remain no carnal desire in such persons and, therefore, no further sensuous necessity of such bodily union. This is, however, only the negative result. By the elimination of carnality, one also gets rid of the delusion that the soul can be either male or female, or have any sex in the worldly sense. No individual soul can be an object of reciprocal enjoyment of another individual soul, either as male or as female. Spiritual love for Godhead is the sole enjoyer and the jiva is the object of his exclusive enjoyment. Godhead is the only lover. The jiva belongs to the category of his beloved. Godhead is the possessor of power. The jiva is a particle of his obeying power. The jiva, as an unintegrated particle of Krishna's power, can be truly cognizant of Krishna as the sole proprietor of himself. But the jiva is not the direct plenary power of Krishna, but a detached particle of his plenary power. The integrated plenary power of Krishna is eternally and unswervingly obedient to Krishna and never loses sight of him. The jiva can be cognizant of Krishna only if he submits to function in the line of the direct power under the latter's direction. Subordination to the direct power of Krishna, in the case of the jiva, is the same as subordination to Krishna himself, who is not directly cognizable by him. Sri Lakshmi Devi is the plenary power of Krishna. Through her Krishna manifests himself to his dissociated particles of his power. The jiva may become a conscious partner in this process if he subordinates his freedom of will, a gift of the divinity, to the direction of the will of Krishna, manifested for his guidance through Sri Lakshmi Devi. Sri Lakshmi Devi is the consort of Sri Narayana, and the jiva, in his proper nature, is the eternal servitor of Sri Narayana, under Sri Lakshmi Devi as a detached particle of her essence. This cannot be realized by the bound jiva till he wakes to his true nature and is thereby freed from all taint of mundane sensuous hankerings. The marriage of Godhead, as every other act of his, is identical with Godhead and as such is an object of our worship. The instinct of sexuality, that is so strong in all fallen jivas, is the perverted reflection of the highest function of his real nature, which seeks eternally to subordinate herself to Godhead through serving love. This spiritual impulse of serving love appears in bound jivas in the unwholesome perverted form of lust seeking for its own gratification. This is, indeed, the worst of all the perversions appearing in this world and also the one that is the most difficult to get rid of. Man and woman in this world understand well enough the process of exploiting one another's lust for the reciprocal gratification of their senses. They choose to think gratuitously that, as God himself has endowed them with the sexual impulse, it must, therefore, be also his intention that it is their duty to avail of the opportunity so mercifully provided. Moderate and well-considered sexuality thus comes to be wrongly regarded as a part and parcel of our proper nature, and the institution of marriage for the carnal purpose is looked upon as providing the convenient and proper conditions for the exercise of this legitimate God-given impulse. The idea of a human being without any sexual weakness hence comes to be regarded with the greatest suspicion, being considered as either an impossibility or an abnormality. But as a matter of fact, carnal sexuality is not any impulse of our higher nature. It is a hankering for material enjoyment which can, by its nature, only gratify or disgust the material body and mind, which have no substantive kinship with the soul. The corresponding pure spiritual impulse is completely free from the desire of any selfish enjoyment. Our soul possesses spiritual senses which abstain from seeking their own gratification by a spontaneous tendency. They want to provide, and not to intercept for themselves, all enjoyments for the divinity. This service on the spiritual plane has no grossness or impurity which we, from our experience of the corresponding material process, associate with the object of carnal marriage. The marriage of individual souls with Godhead is the establishment of an reserved spiritual reciprocal communion with the divinity which is confusedly reflected in an unwholesome and inverted form in the sexual impulse of this world. The realization of the most intimate spiritual communion is the fulfillment of the same spiritual impulse. The pursuit of sexual gratification of oneself is the obstacle in the way of such realization and is, in fact, the greatest punishment that is suffered by the jiva by reason of his desire for enjoyment. God does not accept the carnal sentiment, which is the worst form of aversion to Godhead, an act of personal disloyalty to the sole enjoyer of all the spiritual senses of the jiva whose highest function consists in serving the Lord with all his spiritual senses. This spiritual service is available to the jiva only if he happens to be in the state of perfect subordination to Godhead under the unconditional direction of Sri Lakshmi Devi, the plenary power who is the eternal consort of the Lord. Sri Narayana communes directly with Sri Lakshmi Devi and the latter carries out the divine will in an infinity of ways. The jiva is enabled to commune with Godhead as a particle of THC gratuitous extension of the divine process by submitting to be a humble agent of Sri Lakshmi Devi who is entitled to impart to him, for the purpose, a particle of the pure impulse by which she ever serves her soul Lord. This is the most intimate reciprocal communion, or spiritual marriage, of the jiva with the divinity. Those who cherish the marriage of Lakshmi and Narayana are by such devotion freed from the fell delusion of carnal sexuality on the attainment of the reciprocal spiritual communion with divinity, which is the very highest form of service for the jiva. The fallen jiva is prepared to admit, at any rate in practice, the inexorable penal laws of physical nature, but, with strange perversity, is viciously disposed to oppose as irrational the existence of the far more inexorable code of love that regulates the affairs of the spiritual world. But the authority of Godhead is no less absolute in the realm of spirit than it is in this prison house of the physical world. The scientists try to understand, without questioning their rationale, the absolute potency, or authority, of the laws of this material universe. It is necessary to carry the same rational attitude into all enquiries regarding the spiritual world where, however, the laws of this physical world cannot prevail. The scientific spiritual method for attaining to the knowledge of the spiritual world should, therefore, by strict analogy, also possess the following order of development, viz. 1. Actual perception of the spiritual world. 2. Gathering of spiritual experience. 3. Analysis of such experience. 4. Acquisition of right conduct by assimilated knowledge. As the spiritual realm happens to be wholly unknown to us, we must be disposed to take the help of the experience of those who have access to it, if we hope to have even the initial working knowledge of its conditions during this short span of human life. All this is in strict analogy with the method of empiric science. On the very day that Sri Gaur-Sundar met Lakshmi Devi, a Brahmana matchmaker, matchmaking by the way was then an honored office as it should be, who bore the name of Banamali Akriya, providentially made his appearance before Sachi Devi. The Brahmana, after making his obeisance to Mother Sachi, accepted a seat which was cordially offered by her. Thereafter Banamali Akriya broached his proposal. It was high time for her to think about the marriage of her son. Sri Balabha, who also lived at Nabadwap, offered an unexceptionable connection as regards family, character and piety of life. His daughter was the goddess Lakshmi herself by the fame of her beauty and disposition. Sachi Devi might accept this connection if she deemed it desirable. Mother Sachi replied, "My son is a fatherless boy. Let him lie and study. I am not thinking of any other thing just now." The Brahmana felt utterly discouraged by this dry rejoinder and left with a heavy heart. Banamali Akriya fell in with the Lord on his way back from his academy, who embraced him by way of merriment. The Lord asked where he had been. The Brahmana said he had been to his mother to propose his marriage. He could not understand why she did not take it at all seriously. On hearing of this the Lord became silent. He took his leave of him with a smile and returned home. He laughingly asked his mother why she had not received the Akriya in a gracious manner. Sachi was delighted on catching the hint from her son and sent for the Brahmana on the day following. She then said to him, "Settle as expeditiously as possible the affair that you mentioned yesterday. You have my full consent." Thereupon, taking the dust of the feet of Sachi, the Brahmana immediately set out for the home of Balabhakrya. When Banamali Gatak presented himself before Balabhakrya, the latter received him with great respect. Having accepted a seat duly offered by Balabhakrya, Banamali proceeded to ask him forthwith to fix an auspicious day for the marriage of his daughter. The son of Purandar Misra, by name Bishwambhar, most learned and possessed of all good qualities, was the only eligible bridegroom for his daughter. That was also the proposal which Banamali had to make to him. He accordingly advises Balabhakrya to accept the same, provided, of course, it really commended itself to him. Balabhakrya was filled with the greatest joy on receiving the proposal. He said that such a son-in-law was to be had only by sheer good fortune. If Krishna is gracious to me, or the goddesses Lakshmi and Gauri are pleased towards my daughter, only then, and not otherwise, I shall deserve to have such son-in-law. Be pleased to put forth your best endeavor by all means to settle this affair with the least possible delay. But there is one point which I feel ashamed to mention. I am poor. I am unable to afford any dowry. It is only my daughter whom I shall give away, and 5 myrobalans as her dowry. This is my request to you. You are to obtain their assent to this. On hearing these words of Balabhakrya, the Gatak felt a deep joy at the success of his mission and, coming back to Sachi, delivered to her the happy news and asked her to fix an auspicious day for the ceremony. All friends of the family were filled with gladness on hearing the happy tidings and applied themselves assiduously to make every preparation for the due solemnization of the nuptials of Sri Lakshmi and Sri Narayana. The preliminary, Adhibas, ceremony was duly performed on an auspicious day, to the accompaniment of dance, song and a great variety of music. The Brahmanas recited the Veda on all sides. Nimai took his seat in the center of the gathering. The friends and Brahmanas performed this ceremony of betrothal by making offerings of perfumes and garlands to the Lord. The Brahmanas were specially pleased, being treated to excellent perfumes, sandal paste, betel and garlands. Balabhakrya came over to the home of Sachi and, having duly performed the same rite, returned with a joyous heart to his residence. Rising early next morning, the Lord bathed, gave away alms and honored the mains with due worship. There was an great jubilation of dance, song and music. On all sides there arose a mighty tumult, amidst shouts of give and take. There was a multitudinous gathering of loyal matrons, well-wishers, friends, Brahmanas and good people. Mother Sachi joyfully offered to the ladies, who were present, fried rice, plantain, vermilion, betel and oil. The gods and their consorts, assuming human forms, merrily assembled to witness the marriage of the Lord. Balabhakrya also performed the worship of the gods and departed ancestors in the customary manner. At the hour of twilight, in an auspicious moment, the Lord set out in marriage procession to the house of Balabha Misra. No sooner did the Lord arrive at the residence of Misra, the minds of Misra and all his family were filled with a boundless joy. Misra with due respect and a glad heart helped his son-in-law to the bridegroom's seat. He then brought out his daughter Lakshmi, decked in all her ornaments, to the presence of the Lord. The people began to shout the name of Hari. They lifted Lakshmi Devi from the ground and carried her on their shoulders through the function of perambulating the Lord 7 times. Then, after making her obeisance to him, Lakshmi stood before the Lord with the palms of her hands joined in the attitude of supplication. Then the two threw flowers at each other, and both Lakshmi and Narayana were very much pleased. Lakshmi then placed a beautiful garland at the feet of the Lord and, making obeisance, made the formal surrender of herself. The crowd thereupon raised a paean of triumph on all sides, singing with many voices the name of Hari so that no other sound could be heard. The holy rite of beholding each other's face was next performed in the same manner. Then the Lord was seated with Lakshmi on his left side. The Lord was in the first bloom of youth, surpassing the god of love and beauty, by whose side Lakshmi now took her seat. The beauty and joy that manifested themselves in the house of Misra no one has power to describe. Thereafter Balabha sat down to the function of giving away his daughter. It seemed as if Bhismaka himself had reappeared in this world. After robbing the body of the Lord with rich clothing, garlands and sandal paste, the best of Brahmanas washed his lotus feet, by whose adoration Brahma, his prime ancestor, had been enabled to create the world. He then bestowed his daughter in marriage in due form. The Brahmana was immersed in the sea of bliss. It was now the turn of the matrons who duly performed the customary rites of the family. The Lord passed the night in the house of Balabhakrya. On the following day he set out for his own home in the company of Lakshmi. All the people rushed out to have a sight of the Lord as he was taken home on the shoulders of men, in a due 1A, with Lakshmi seated by his side. Lakshmi and Narayana were both richly decorated with perfumes, garlands, ornaments, crowns, sandal paste and collyrium. All the people praised them as they caught a glimpse of the divine pair. The ladies were specially affected by the sight. That fortunate maiden must have long worshipped Hera and Gauri with her heart's best devotion. Could such husband be obtained by a girl except through extraordinary good luck? Some said that the bridegroom and bride seemed to be Hera and Gauri themselves. Some said they were Indra and Sachi, or Rati and Maidana. Some said they were Lakshmi and Narayana. A group of ladies declared them to be Sita and Rama, shining with incomparable beauty, seated together on the dola. Thus said all those ladies. They beheld Lakshmi and Narayana with an auspicious intent. In this manner the Lord returned home at nightfall with the tumult of dance, song and music. Then Sachi Devi, accompanied by the Brahmana matrons, with great joy, led her daughter-in-law into the house. She satisfied all the Brahmanas and the dancers and musicians by lavish gifts of money, clothing and sweet words. We have it on the authority of Thakur Brindavandas that those who listen to this holy narrative of the Lord's marriage are completely freed from the bondage of this world. As Sri Lakshmi Devi took her place by the side of the Lord, the home of Sachi glowed with a transcendent radiance. Sachi noticed, always both inside and outside the house, a wonderful flaming brilliance which could not, however, be definitely located. She sometimes saw a blazing tongue of fire by the side of her son, but as she turned to see again, it had vanished. She experienced off and on the fragrance of the lotus flower. Her amazement reached its climax and made her thoughtful. Mother Sachi mused, I understand the cause of it. Lakshmi abides in this maiden. For this reason I perceive the light and the fragrance of the lotus. There is now also no pinch of the poverty of the bygone days. Ever since this Lakshmi, my daughter-in-law, came into the house, wealth in every form has been pouring in from all sides in a most unaccountable manner. Mother Sachi often spoke in this strain. The Lord still chose to remain unmanifest. No one can understand the will of God or how he sports at any time. When God does not make himself known, even Lakshmi herself cannot know. This is testified by all the scriptures, by the Vedas and the Puranas, that he alone can know the Supreme Lord whom he himself favors. I have retained the actual words of Thakur Brindavandas in describing the marriage of Sri Gaur Sundar with Sri Lakshmi Devi. The activities of Sri Caitanya are not like those of mortal men. They were manifested in this world for the purpose of healing the disease of mortality by their contemplation. Most fallen souls, who are denizens of this world, like nothing better than marrying and giving in marriage. It may be supposed that the detailed narrative of the marriage of Sri Caitanya has been recorded by his devotee to serve as a model to be followed by the fallen jivas and as sanctioning the institution of marriage itself for ensuring spiritual progress. Such a conclusion would also be most acceptable to those who are disposed to find a religious sanction for carnality. But the associates of Sri Caitanya have cautioned us in unmistakable terms against initiation of the conduct of Sri Caitanya. The marriage of Sri Caitanya is not a carnal affair. It is not to be understood as the glorification of the mundane institution of marriage. If Sri Caitanya is regarded as immortal, his marriage will naturally be considered as an affair like that of man and woman of this world. Those who choose to think in this way are of course free to follow the dictate of their empiric judgment. Only the associates and true followers of Sri Caitanya, who have recorded the true meaning of the events of his career for the benefit of humanity and who have acquired the eligibility to be heard, by fully acting up to their professions, require us to forget tentatively the stubborn insinuations of our worldly experience which is bound to fail utterly to give us the knowledge of the reality of which we stand in such urgent need. The details of the marriage of Sri Gaur Sundar should be listened to from the lips of sadhus, i.e., of those who are wholly devoted to the exclusive service of Godhead. God is the sole proprietor of our senses. When our senses are directed Godward, they lose their grossness engendered by their wrong employment on subjects of this world. If the spiritual instinct, corresponding to sexuality, could be directed towards Godhead, it would be realized as the spiritual impulse of love. So long as it deliberately courts its stultification by directing itself to non-God for support, it finds itself stranded on this unwholesome mundane plane. Lust is the perversion of love into a loathsome mundane entity due to its adulterous and perverted application amounting to a suicidal crime against its own nature. In other words, when the faculty of amorous love is exercised by the soul, who is free from mundane hankering towards the all-holy, it is love. Once this change of direction is really established, the substantive existence of the spiritual function corresponding to lust is realized on the automatic elimination of all mundane unwholesomeness. The spiritual function possesses perfectly wholesome nature and permanent substantive existence. The corresponding mundane function is devoid of both these essential characteristics. This is altogether inconceivable to the materialized mind. The perception of the associated correlatives of inferiority and superiority, grossness and wholesomeness, evil and good, smallness and greatness, etc., is the inevitable concomitant of our gross sensuous experience. God reserves the right of appearing to any and every entity as he pleases, and as soon as he chooses to favor an entity by his acceptance of his service, he is instantly freed from all grossness by such acceptance. The marriage rite of a Bengali Brahmana has nothing inherently spiritual in it, but it is nevertheless an eternal activity for God to accept these rites and all rights, and by such acceptance they are necessarily freed from all grossness and imperfection. Those who do not want to enter fully into this real meaning of the activities of the divinity when they become visible in this world, earn only damnation by their misreading of the scriptures. The marriage rite of a Bengali pseudo-Brahmana is categorically different from that of Sri Caitanya for the reasons suggested above. The former produces and aggravates the malady of carnality. Such a result cannot be avoided by merely choosing to imagine that the sensuous affair is sanctioned by the divine. Because the divine marriage is located wholly above the plane of the conditioned soul, the sight or contemplation of the divine event reacts on the conditioned soul if he does not oppose the process by the persistent abuse of his freedom of will in the matter of sexuality. The result of such reaction is spiritually beneficial. The non-spiritual, even in the case of the votary of intangible abstractions, can only react on the non-spiritual and complicate the non-spiritual condition. The actual existence and redeeming potency of the divinity is unconsciously, but nonetheless decisively, denied by the idealist whose vision is completely deluded by the subtler potency of matter by reason of such attitude. Gaur-Sundar is Godhead himself. The contemplation of his marriage rite, in its minutest details with an enlightened serving faith elicited by the instructions of the good preceptor, is bound to react on the fettered soul and free him from the bondage of carnality. We are servants of Krishna. We are not masters of anything. Sri Lakshmi Devi is the eternal consort of Sri Gaur-Sundar and serves him as consort. Sri Gaur-Sundar is the lord of Sri Lakshmi Devi. The jiva cannot be the lord of any entity. The marriage institution of this world establishes a mundane connection between two material bodies inside which two offending jivas are imprisoned. Having lost all consciousness of his real, i.e., spiritual nature, the bound jiva, supposing his physical body to be identical with himself, falls under the power of the physical senses and considers himself as an enjoyer of sensuous pleasure accruing from such reciprocation of bodily and mental activities. The sexual relationship in the flesh is the perverted caricature by material symbols of the state of intimate spiritual communion of the individual soul with God in his pure natural state. The institution of marriage is sinful if the jiva regards it as a means of his sensuous gratification, as such amorous activities necessarily tend to prolong the bondage of matter and consequent forgetfulness of Godhead. The bodily marriage is harmful and unnatural. In the conditioned state it may not be always possible to avoid the married state in a natural way, but it is always possible even for a married couple to honestly try to steer clear of carnality. They are enabled to do this if they learn the nature of the real connubial connection, which is possible only in the Supreme Lord, from the lips of sadhus. Being thus enlightened by the mercy of sadhus, one is enabled to realize the true meaning of shastric provisions in regard to marriage that are intended to unite individual souls to God by the gradual but complete elimination of all carnal desire. Sometimes also a self-realized soul, sadhu, may adopt the married state in order to serve God by setting an example to fallen jivas embodying the shastric ideal of the married state. But nothing is gained by lifeless imitation of the external conduct of such a person. It is necessary first of all to seek for true enlightenment at the feet of the guileless and sincere servants of the Lord. To the understanding, enlightened by the causeless mercy of sadhus, the real significance of the sacrament of marriage discloses itself. Conditioned souls have no right of entry into the spiritual realm until and unless they are enabled to realize the necessity of submitting to the purgatorial process of the cleansing of all worldly dirt by the unconditional service of the true devotees of Godhead. The ladies of the neighborhood gave vent to their opinion that the bride and bridegroom were no other than Lakshmi and Narayana. Or, in other words, they were regarded as Godhead and his eternal consort. This was also fully applicable to the case. But we should be on our guard against the utterly profane carnal sentimentalism that proposes to regard every newly married pair as resembling Lakshmi and Narayana, or, for the matter of that which proposes to regard any jiva as the husband or wife of another by his spiritual nature. The mundane relation of husband and wife is of the flesh, being the grossly perverted eternal relation that unites mediately the individual soul, in his state of grace, with the fountainhead of all existence through his willing, unconditional submission to the guidance of the plenary power. It is sheer folly to confound the one with the other. Similarly, those are also equally deluded who choose to regard the issue born of such bodily union as being on a level with divine Gopala. Such people affect to be innocently unconscious of the eternal difference that separates this netherworld, its concerns and the conditioned souls from the divinity and his own. The jiva commits a great offense against Godhead when he marries another jiva for the practice of carnality, and a sacrilege when he chooses to regard such bodily union as divinely ordained. The soul of the jiva can be neither wife nor husband in the worldly sense. He has nothing to do with this world. The flesh and all its concerns are the snare which entraps the soul who is disinclined to serve Godhead and seeks, in lieu of the spiritual and absolutely pure service of the Lord, his own selfish enjoyment. So long as the desire for such enjoyment retains possession of the mind of the jiva, he is apt to turn a deaf ear to the word of God, always warning him from without and within against the seductions of the flesh. To such a person the world appears to be a place of legitimate sensuous enjoyment. When such a person also sets up as a preacher of the Word of God, he is bound to misinterpret the Scriptures in order to make them tally with his own sensuous outlook, and often carries this misinterpretation to such lengths that he feels no scruple in representing his sensual activities as being identical with the service of God on the ground that they are also applauded by all other sinners. It is these pseudo-preachers who also declare the consummation of carnal marriage between one jiva and another as identical with the institution sanctioned by the Scriptures. Let us beware of these pseudo-preachers who are infinitely worse than even the proverbial wolves in sheep's clothing. One should on principle refuse to be instructed in the Word of God by a worldling who deceives himself and others by putting on the holy garb of a servant of God, and should avoid the society of such a person as that of an open enemy of Godhead. Toleration of such persons is the worst cruelty to oneself as well as to the person himself, being an offense at the feet of the Lord and against the express teaching of all Scriptures. These hypocritical teachers of the religion are worse than even the rankest of atheists by profession. Chapter X, Professor Lifekant. The figure of Sri Gaurasundar as Professor Adhyapaka has been described in some detail by Thakur Brindavandas. He was constantly surrounded by a host of admiring pupils. He was extremely proud of his learning and took a particular pleasure in ridiculing and exposing the ignorance of everybody. He cared for nothing except his books. He had an extraordinarily beautiful appearance and was in the bloom of his youth. Grace and beauty marked his every limb. His hands reached down to the knee. His wide eyes resembled the petals of the lotus flower. His lips were always tinged by betel. He wore the most handsome clothing. This beautiful, young, arrogant scholar's teaching was also unique in character. No savant of the then greatest center of learning of India presumed to understand it really. The quondam teacher of Sri Gaurasundar, fortunate Gangadas Pandit, was the only exception. The Lord opened out the store of his learning freely to his old teacher. Worldly-minded people praised the scholar and said that the parents of such a son were the possessors of the richest of all treasures. To the womankind this insolent scholar appeared in the likeness of the god of love himself. To the atheists he was terrible as death. To the Pandits he was like a second Brihaspati by his wonderful learning. Different persons viewed him in a different light in accordance with their particular standards of the highest worth. But there was one group of people who did not share this general admiration of the particularly well-dressed teacher. This was the community of the Vaishnavas. They were utterly disappointed to find no trace of inclination for Krishna in this fascinating youth whose great learning, they knew well, would be of no avail to save him from the clutches of ignorance and death. They did not hesitate to speak out to his face, "Why dost thou waste thy time in the delusions of learning?" The Lord laughed as he listened to the words of his servants and replied, "I am fortunate in that you take the trouble to teach it to me." There was at this time a considerable community of Vaishnavas resident in Nabadwip, as the place offered special facilities for study and the prospect of living close to the holy Ganges. Among them was a large body of devotees from Chattagram, Chittagong. In the afternoon the Vaishnavas assembled in the academy of Sri Advaita. They met there regularly to discourse about Krishna. It was a gathering of persons, all of whom were from their birth without the least attachment for the things of this world. In fact, they were not of this world at all. They had been born in different parts of the country and were brought together at Navadvip by the will of Godhead. Mukunda sang the Kirtana of Hari to this assembly of the pure devotees. All the Vaishnavas were pleased with Mukunda, whose song had the quality of melting their hearts. The joy of the assembled devotees, as Mukunda would begin to sing, became so intense that it expressed itself in strange ways. Some wept, some laughed, some began to dance, some rolled on the ground, forgetful of their apparel, some donned their cloth tightly and shouted challenge of defiance, some ran up to Mukunda and clasped his feet. So wonderful indeed was the effect on those Vaishnavas of the Kirtana of Krishna sang by Mukunda. His song produced the highest bliss and made the Vaishnavas forget all cause of grief. The Lord was specially pleased with Mukunda in his heart. For this reason, he would tease Mukunda whenever he chanced to meet him by asking him to solve logical riddles. This led to prolonged controversies. Mukunda was well versed in the science of logic and made use of every form of argument in holding his ground against the onslaughts of Sri Gaurasundar. But he was always beaten in the long run. Nimai put these riddles also to Sribas Pundit and other devotees. They were very much afraid of his puzzles and always scattered at his approach. The devotees had no taste for any discourse except regarding Krishna, and Nimai never proposed anything except riddles of dry logic. No one could solve his puzzles and he mercilessly exposed all who broke down. One day as the Lord was passing along the highway in the company of his pupils with every manifestation of the vanity of a pedantic scholar, Mukunda, who was going to the Ganges for his bath, saw the Lord from a distance and immediately took to his heels. Noticing this, the Lord said to his servant Govinda, "Why did the rascal bolt on seeing me?" Govinda did not understand the reason of Mukunda's conduct. He suggested that he might have had some business of his own. The Lord said that the real reason was his belief that a Vaishnava should never greet a person who is averse to Godhead. Then the Lord spoke in the hearing of all, "Let him keep aloof for the present. I will see how long he will avoid me in this manner. I will become such a good Vaishnava that even Siva and Brahma will dance attendance at my doorsteps. Those very people, who now flee at my approach, will then sing my praise." He said this to his students laughingly as he was returning home in their company. It was, indeed, a most distressing period for the devotees of Navadvip. The whole of Nadia was mad with the taste of riches and sons. The people launched into invectives as soon as they heard of Kirtana. They, indeed, said openly that it was only a device for filling the belly. They were specially wroth against Sribas and his three brothers. The arguments they used against the Vaishnavas have been preserved by Thakur Brindavandas. Was there any justification in dancing in their saucy and unmerry way, giving up the method of intellectual communion? I myself have read the Bhagavata many times over, but I do not find in it any method of dancing and crying. I cannot get any sleep after dinner on account of Sribas and his brothers. Is it not pious enough if one calls upon Krishna with a subdued voice? Is there any unavoidable necessity of dancing, singing and shouting? This was the universal attitude of all non-Vaishnavas. They talked and jeered in this manner whenever they met the Vaishnavas. When the devotees used to feel very much depressed at such treatment by the people, Sri Advaita would repeat his assurance that he would destroy all those atheists, as Sri Krishna would be with them in a very short time in the town of Navadvip itself. The words of Advaita dispelled all their sorrows and the Vaishnavas kept up the blessed Kirtana of Krishna with the greatest joy. Such was the state of affairs at Navadvip when Lord Vishwambhar was deeply occupied with his secular studies. So the Lord himself, the teacher of the whole world, by his conduct as well as instruction, was apparently pursuing a mode of life which was indistinguishable from that of the average worldly people. Would we be justified in blaming the pseudo-teachers of the Vaishnava religion of these days who, professing to follow the example of Sri Gaurasundar, led a life of luxurious ease with their wives and children? If Sri Gaurasundar chewed betel, should they not also do the same as in duty bound? If Professor Nimai dressed faultlessly, poked fun at the Vaishnavas and devoted himself exclusively to secular studies, why should such innocent amenities of a householder's life be forbidden to his followers? The questions no doubt suggest their own answer. In the case of Sri Gaurasundar, all this was absolutely proper. To the true devotee of Godhead everything is handy and fit, as he knows their use for the service of Godhead. The eternal conduct of the devotee derives its value for worldly observers from this internal quality. If a woman is really chaste, she can do nothing that is improper. If she is really unchaste, she can do nothing that is proper, not even by mimicking the external conduct of any chaste lady. Such mimicry is in no way different from unchastity and is often the more dangerous form of wickedness. A thing can be but itself. External conduct is always deceptive, being external. By imitating the external conduct of Sri Gaur Sundar that was visible to mundane observers at any period of his activities, nothing but the direst offense is reaped. The relation of the Lord to his consort, to his pupils, to his devotees is misunderstood if we choose to misunderstand them by refusing to listen to those who are acquainted with the real nature of Nimai. Even the Vaishnavas confessed when they came to know him later as he really is, that they also had once utterly misunderstood him and his activities, before he himself manifested the real nature of them in their more explicit form to their higher consciousness. The full view regarding the activities of Sri Gaur Sundar is attainable only if they are regarded as the pastimes of Godhead himself. Sri Gaur Sundar is identical with Sri Krishna. Those who ignore this by misunderstanding his role as devotee necessarily fail to obtain the adequate view of his doings. The want of this knowledge apparently led even the Vaishnavas themselves to deprecations of the external conduct of Sri Gaur Sundar at this period. They wished that he should become a devotee like themselves. This is the natural desire of all pure Vaishnavas in regard to non-Vaishnavas. The pursuit of secular studies in which Sri Gaur Sundar was wholly absorbed and the employment of his controversial powers on subjects other than Krishna were, therefore, condemned by those pure devotees as the abuse of his intellectual powers. It is instructive to find that those Vaishnavas were not under the delusion, which is so much cherished by the pseudo-Vaishnavas of these days, that the conduct of Nimai was that of the model servant of Godhead. They were right so far. They apparently erred in supposing that Sri Gaur Sundar was a Vaishnava and not Vishnu himself. But subsequently also, when they knew the Lord by his grace, they did not, therefore, try to imitate the conduct of Sri Gaur Sundar. Secular studies and pursuits in their purely worldly sense are not only unnecessary but are positively harmful to the jiva in the state of bondage. The object and method of all non-spiritual activities is to be enabled thereby to acquire extended opportunities of selfish, material enjoyment, a desideratum which is foreign to the nature of the jiva in the state of grace. Any act which is undertaken for securing one's own enjoyment ceases to have any reference to the service of the Lord who is the absolute master, proprietor and of everything. The pursuit of the knowledge of the things of this world with reference to ourselves as enjoyers of them is not the function of the pure soul. By all knowledge Godhead alone is properly served. The pursuit of secular knowledge is productive of spiritual well-being if it possesses this exclusive reference to Godhead both as regards its object and method. The acceptance of this true principle does not destroy any value, it only removes our ignorance and fulfills the only real object of all knowledge. God certainly indwells all knowledge, but inaccessibly to the conditioned soul. As soon as the conditioned soul is enabled to realize his presence in all learning, his object and method of pursuing knowledge ceases to be secular and harmful. Sri Gaur Sundar was within his rights in accepting the service of the goddesses of secular learning and of physical nature, because he is their lord and proprietor. There could be no absence of reference in the reference himself. But because Sri Gaur Sundar was pleased to exhibit the leela of pursuing secular knowledge for its own sake, those who are aware of his divinity should not, with an inexcusable perversity of judgment, jump to the conclusion that his conduct was intended to justify the apparently similar procedure of any jivas if they happen to cherish the unnatural desire of becoming the masters or slaves of material nature. God is always the master even when he chooses to manifest his divine form in this unspiritual world. Even when the Lord seems, to the perverted judgment of fallen jivas, to be subject, like themselves, to the laws of physical nature, he remains her master nonetheless. Even the devotees themselves failed to understand the doings of the Lord at this period, although his conduct was appreciated by worldly people who supposed, in their disloyal delusion, that it resembled their own. This latter kind of appreciation was an unconscious offense against the Lord, while the depreciation of his conduct by the devotees was not an offense, although it was an error, into which they fell by the will of Godhead himself, for the furtherance of his pastimes. Worldly people misunderstood the conduct of both Sri Gaur Sundar and his devotees. They admired Sri Gaur Sundar for his great qualities, for the beauty of his person and for his great learning. They desired those things for themselves and could, therefore, appreciate them by the method of envy. The bound jiva wants to enjoy, to rule, to possess beauty and learning for increasing his supposed power and scope of selfish enjoyment. Sri Gaurasundar had all what they so wrongly desire. The worldly people regarded him as the most successful of worldlings. They disliked the devotees, because they did not approve of their lack of worldliness. The mode of life of the devotees seemed in the eyes of those worldly people to be not merely bad, but ridiculous. It is not possible for worldly people to understand the ways of pure devotees. It is still less possible for them to understand the ways of God Himself. If we want to follow Sri Gaurasundar, we should in the first place have to know our real relationship to Him. In proportion as this knowledge of our relationship with Godhead is realized, we are in a position to understand His ways. When Sri Gaurasundar took to secular study, apparently for its own sake, his purpose was to be merciful to the goddess of secular learning inside whose heart he ever dwells in the form that is incomprehensible to the conditioned jiva. And, secondarily, to establish the principle, for the benefit of the fallen jivas, that they should neither thoughtlessly imitate nor condemn the conduct of the pure devotee, nor suppose that he is ever liable to error by reason of his youth, or apparent ignorance of the concerns of this world, or even apparent devotion to them. The efforts of the servants of God are not governed by the instinct of so-called self-preservation, or for adjustment to the phenomenal environment which is apt to dominance the activities of fallen jivas. The devotees never do anything except under the pure impulse of serving Krishna. It is not altogether impossible for us, even while we continue in the sinful state, to admit this. Regarding Sri Mukunda Datta, we have the hint in Sri Caitanya Charitamrita that Lord Caitanya himself dances in the Kirtana of Mukunda. Mukunda made his appearance in Chittagong. In Gauraganad Sadipika he is identified with Madhukantha, the singer of Brata. We have seen already that Mukunda Datta was a fellow student of Sri Caitanya in the academy of Sri Gangadas Pandit. Mukunda was a most brilliant scholar and Caitanya found great delight in putting to him the most difficult riddles of logic. Mukunda read the Bhagavatam to Sri Caitanya after the latter's return from Gaya. When Sri Caitanya danced in the yard of Sribas Pandit, Mukunda sang the Kirtana. He accompanied Sri Caitanya to Katwa on the occasion of his acceptance of renunciation, sannyas, and subsequently followed him to Puri. He used to come every year to Puri from Bengal to visit the Lord. In the company of his other devotees, the godless people of that time objected to the Kirtana on the ground that dancing and singing with a loud voice are not the method of worship recommended by the Bhagavatam. This is true in regard to the insincere performances of the pseudo-Vaishnavas. But the Bhagavatam frequently mentions the manifestation of genuine spiritual perturbations in the forms of laughter, weeping, dancing, singing, etc., in an unaccountable form in the true devotees of Krishna. The people were angered by the loud Kirtana of Sribas and his brothers for the ostensible reason that it stood in the way of their sleep, etc. Those who profess to be seekers of worldly merit, punya, for its enjoyable rewards, naturally misunderstand the efforts of pure devotees who practice devotion to Godhead for benefiting all persons by inclining them to the service of Godhead, which is obstructed by their hankerings after worldly enjoyment. But those godless people supposed, in their ignorance, that the dancing and singing of the Vaishnavas, which are performed because they are pleasing to Krishna, are a crude and inferior form of worship of which the lonely individualistic method was regarded as the highest. This insolence of judgment, which is the necessary and invariable concomitant of simulation of worship by conditioned souls, proved its own terrible punishment and effectively prevented those scoffers from listening to the unalloyed Kirtana of Hari that was nightly performed within the reach of their hearing, for the benefit of all, by Sribas Pandit and his brothers, in the teeth of the violent, uncalled for, suicidal opposition of all those self-complacent worldly egotists. While Nimai was thus wholly immersed in the pleasures of study, Sri Isvarapuri came to Nabadwap and presented himself at the house of Advaita. He was clad in the garb of an ascetic, sannyasin, of one staff, and so no one suspected him to be a Vaishnava. But Advaita noticed the glow of his extraordinary spiritual energy and recognized him as a theistic, Vaishnava, sannyasin. No sooner did Mukunda begin a song about Krishna in the gathering of the Vaishnavas at Advaita, the ocean of natural love for Krishna in the pure heart of Puri was deeply stirred. Presently all the Vaishnavas came to learn that the sannyasin, who loved Krishna so deeply, was no other than Sri Isvarapuri, the loved disciple of Sri Madhavendra Puri. One day as Sri Gaurasundar was returning home after teaching, he accidentally met Sri Iswarapuri on his way and did obeisance to him, as is the duty of every householder towards a sannyasin. Sri Isvarapuri was struck by the wonderfully beautiful appearance of Sri Gauranga and enquired who he was and what subject he taught. Nimai with due deference answered the questions of Sri Svarapuri and, with great respect and cordiality, invited him to accompany him to his house and accept the alms of his day's meal there. Sachi Devi cooked the offering for Krishna and gave it in alms to Sri Svarapuri. After the meal, Sri Svarapuri engaged with Nimai Pandit in discourse regarding Krishna and in course of the talk manifested his overwhelming love for Krishna. Sri Svarapuri spent several months at Nabadwap at the house of Sri Gopinathakriya, sister's husband, the famous Sarbabdhama Bhattacharya of Vidyanagar. Nimai Pandit went to Vidyanagar in the evenings to pay his respects to Sri Svarapuri at the conclusion of his day's teaching. Sri Svarapuri was charmed with the love for Krishna of Sri Gadadhar Pandit, who was spontaneously unattached to the world from infancy. Moved by feeling of affection, Sri Svarapuri undertook to read to Gadadhar his own work, Sri Krishna Leelamritam. One day Sri Svarapuri asked Nimai Pandit to correct any mistakes that he might detect in his book, promising to adopt any alterations that he might suggest. The Lord replied that as the book contained the account of the doings of Krishna and had been written by a pure devotee like Sri Svarapuri, any person who presumed to detect any fault in it would certainly commit a grave offense against Godhead. Whatever the external quality of the verses of a devotee might seem to be, Krishna is fully pleased thereby. There was no doubt about it. Any grammatical or other defect that may happen to be present in the language of the devotee are overlooked by Krishna, who is ever subdued by the homage of the heart and accepts nothing but pure love for himself. If anyone found fault with the language of a devotee, it only proved that the critic was devoid of the grace of Krishna. There did not exist the person who would dare to find fault with the language used by a pure devotee like Purapada to convey the tidings of Krishna. But Sri Svarapuri continued to press his request that Nimai Pandit might point out the defect of his book. In this manner Svarapuri spent hours in discussing daily a variety of topics with Nimai. One day, after listening to a